Oh yeah, you'd be good at coming up with water songs. All right. Good morning. I'm Felicia Marcus, Chair of the Board, and today is Tuesday, April 3rd at 9:33 a.m., and the meeting is now called to order. With me are, to my left, Vice Chair Stephen Moore, to his left, Board Member Didi D'Adamo, to my right, Board Member Tam Dodak, and to her right, Board Member Joaquin Esquivel, who is now officially a real board member because he was confirmed yesterday. Okay. As opposed to the real board member you were before you were confirmed, right? Ms. Sobek, will you identify or introduce the staff that are assisting today?
Yes, thank you, Chair Marcus. With me on my left is Chief Counsel Michael Laufer, and on my right, my Chief Deputy Eric Oppenheimer, and assisting us is Janine Townsend, Clerk of the Board, and her assistant, Courtney Tyler.
Terrific. Thank you. We have a couple of new faces, so let me just tell you and remind others of the emergency procedures. Look for the exit nearest you, and if you hear an emergency sounding sound, it's an emergency sound. I don't think we have any other errant sounds that impersonate emergency sounds. Grab your stuff, grab your friends, proceed safely out the building, down the stairs. If you need assistance, somebody will get you to a protected area, and we have them on every floor. We all gather over near the corner of 10th and J. If you want to wait with us, that's advisable because that's where we'll find out when the all clear sounds. The meeting's being webcast and recorded, so please, when you come up to the microphone, speak into it, not rock star, so that it actually can create a static sound on the other end for the folks who are listening in, but close enough that it gets picked up so that folks on the webcast and in the back of the room can hear you as well as we can. And then finally, and perhaps most important to at least one board member, not me, turn your sound-making devices to not making sound-making devices, however you like to do that. All right, first item is public forum, and that is the time on the agenda where the board hears from anyone wishing to speak on a matter that is not on the agenda. We have two today. First we have, and you'll have to help me with the pronunciation, Dave Peschel from the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter, followed by Richard McMurtry from the Santa Clara County Creek Coalition. Let's say that fast 3 times in a row. Hi, thanks for joining us.
Good morning. I pronounce it Poschel, but you're more accurate with Peschel and the German pronunciation. So good morning. I'm here representing the Loma Prieta chapter of the Sierra Club. Our chapter covers Silicon Valley and the Guadalupe and Coyote watersheds in Santa Clara County. Our chapter has tens of thousands of members who strive to live the motto to explore, enjoy, and protect the planet. So I'm here to ask you to help us in this effort by encouraging our Santa Clara Valley Water District to meet their responsibilities to protect the public trust resources. We ask that you enforce the remedies in the complaint filed by the Creeks Coalition and the Sierra Club to prevent further harm to the fish, wildlife resources, and other public trust resources to the Guadalupe and Alamitos Creeks. We do this not with antagonism towards the district, but with heavy hearts. We have been persistent and patient in our efforts to work with the water district to repair the damage to the natural resources that the steelhead depend on. But with Dr. Jerry Smith's study revealing that the steelhead are now likely extirpated from the Coyote Creek on their watch, on your watch, on our watch, after thousands of years and generations of their amazing journey to the sea and back, we can no longer remain patient. We must act now if we are to ensure that this does not occur in the adjacent Guadalupe River, which runs just a few short miles from the Coyote through the same city with similar habitat barriers and managed by the same water district. 15 years ago, the Fisheries and Aquatic Habitat Collaborative effort was agreed to to avoid legal conflict. We still do not even have an EIR for it from the district. 4 years ago, the National Marine Fisheries Service responded to the district's NOP for its Almaden Lake project with a letter outlining their concerns about the Alamedas diversion dam. We still do not even have an EIR. What we do know, what we've been told in numerous meetings and letter exchanges with the Water District, that it has no intention to resolve the concerns expressed in the NMFS, by NMFS about the project. In their 2014 letter, NMFS writes, the modification of Almaden Lake requires a flow-through system that would connect the Alamedas percolation project. This project creates new opportunities to draw water from the restored Alamedas Creek to the district's off-channel percolation ponds. Additional benefits associated with this creation of the new water diversion system for the district's percolation ponds are numerous, including one, the possibility of replacing the existing fish ladder with a natural rock pool weir passage structure and elimination of the fish entrapment problem on the downstream side of the Alamedas diversion dam. 2, sediment transport at the mouth of the Guadalupe Creek, which would would reduce the district's maintenance requirements for flood flow conveyance under the Almaden Expressway Bridge, and fish passage to the Guadalupe Creek. 3, would eliminate the need for the district's 2015-2019 capital improvement project with an estimated cost of $3.27 million. 4, would further reduction of the production of methyl mercury. Without inclusion of the channel reach between Coleman Road and the Alamedas Diversion Dam, the Almaden Lake project cannot fully achieve its objectives of removing entrainment and impacts from predatory species to anadromous fish and reducing thermal impacts. So exhaustive efforts have been made by fishery experts and local advocates, and it resulted in little action from the Water District. So we, the Sierra Club and the Creeks Coalition, plead for your help to enforce the reasonable remedies prescribed in the complaint before it's too late for the meager fish population clinging to existence in the Guadalupe watershed. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask you a quick question? Can you leave a copy of that with us or send us a copy? That'd be great.
I can hand this, the statement
Yeah.
I just read, sure.
Yeah, but I have another question too.
Okay.
You refer to the complaint. Who's the complaint with? Is it with us?
Yes, we have asked that you enforce some action against the Santa Clara Valley Water District. So the complaint, it was just filed a week ago, right?
All right.
Richard can speak to it. You know, Richard's knows more about it, but you know, we asked for some what we think are pretty reasonable remedies.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Chair Marcus, members of the board. For those of you who weren't here last week to hear my eloquent speech, I want to introduce myself as Richard McMurtry of the Santa Clara County Creeks Coalition. I worked in the EPA in the 70s when Jim McGrath and Terry Young were there. I started work at the regional board in 77, and a new Stanford graduate came to share my office named Steve Ritchie, who many of you know. And when I retired, I said, my job's not done. I haven't restored the steelhead trout fishery to Santa Clara County streams. So I formed the Santa Clara County Creeks Coalition, formed of the fish, bird, and land people concerned about streams to try to do together what we couldn't do individually. After I retired, Tam invited Phil Boble, who was chair of the WMI, and I to come make a presentation to this board on the question of erosive forces in streams. And we came and made that presentation, and the light bulb on our projector burnt out before the first slide, just as a way of cultural color. I've spent my entire working life trying to protect the beneficial uses of the waters of the state and the waters of the United States. I remain one of those old-fashioned guys that believe the government has a vital and positive role to play in the protection of our streams for the benefit of the ecology and the people who have the pleasure and delight to be close to these streams. I believe that even when faced with an unequivocal need to act, that government will act, even when their plate of pending actions is overfull like yours is. And so I write this letter asking you to consider 2 events, not 3, just 2. One was the report that Dave alluded to, the report of Dr. Jerry Smith, reporting that steelhead trout have been potentially extirpated in Coyote Creek. There's no steelhead in the creek, and the way the Water District has managed their water flows and failed to remove the fish migration barriers they agreed to remove in 2003. There are no steelhead in the ocean who know Coyote Creek is their natal stream. They have been wiped out. The second was a letter by Linda Lozada of the Santa Clara Valley Water District Board, stating that the Water District cannot charge the water utility for costs associated with public trust resources protection until the state board acts. So there is double need for you to act. One, to address the environmental aspects of this case, and second, the institutional aspects of this case that has led to this tragic local environmental event, at least tragic from a local perspective. We believe that the extirpation report alone, just that alone, should be sufficient for you to conclude something's not right in Santa Clara, maybe very wrong, and that this event is sufficient cause for you to interrupt your busy schedule and say to staff, we want to hear a report on this complaint and the response of the Water District and NOAA and Fish and Game as soon as possible, maybe even within 2 months, before the Water District extirpates the fishery on the Guadalupe and the Stevens Creek as well. We've spoken with staff, and they have kindly and courteously described the next steps on their part, but indicate there is no timeline for taking them. We would appreciate an expression of interest in this complaint on the part of the board. I have probably misquoted Chair Marcus 1,000 times in the past few years when I say, you know what Felicia Marcus, of the chair of the State Water Board, says? She says, we're not about ecosystem management, we're about ecosystem management. And I would love to know what you really said so I could quote you properly. But everyone who knows what's happening in Santa Clara County shakes their head in agreement when they hear my rendition of this quote. And in my letter, which I've handed out 2 new copies for the 2 of you that weren't here last time, I have a 4-page discussion of the ecosystem management system, of which all my ecosystem knowledge, my science, my engineering, my legal analysis, my budget analysis cannot penetrate an ecosystem that is based on trust-based decision-making. If NOAA Fisheries and the advocates say one thing and staff says another thing, the board finds the staff arguments compelling regardless of the quality of the information. What is needed is a regulatory driver. They've gotten away with this for 20 years. It's time to say what you said in Marble Mountain. Further delay and reports that plan to do something are not what's needed. What's not is a firm schedule. We have taken one case, the Alameda's drop structure, that's not addressed by FACE, and ask you to act on that. That's what we're asking you to do. I wish I had more time, because what I really wanted to talk to you about is my request to meet with some of you about the Watershed Management Initiative. I worked on this for 5 years. When I retired, I tried to convince Tom Mumley that they needed to find another person to continue it. Tom's feeling was we were getting nothing out of it. All we were getting is battles with the stormwater program, with all due respect to people from the stormwater program that are here. And so they backed out. And now, 10 years later, the Water District is sued, and they've introduced legislation, SB 1301, that would constrain the ability of regional boards and Fish and Game to require mitigation for flood control projects. I have 3 seconds. I would love to send another email to your secretaries and ask to meet with you. I think I have something valuable to say, and I would appreciate knowing what's realistic. Thank you so much.
Oh, great. Thank you very much for reaching out. I know I couldn't on the time frame you had, but we'll find a way to do that and have that conversation, and recently have been having some other conversations of figuring out how to revive the notion of the watershed programs that I remember so vividly from the 90s, which is really the way we do have to be thinking about this.
Exactly.
So I'm happy to find a time to do that, and we'll figure out who has the time and who can look into the particular complaint or issue.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you for coming. We do have another speaker. This is public comment. All right. John Gordon of JB Solutions.
Good morning, Ms. Marcus and the board. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak today. My name is John Gordon.
I'm Abraham Gadizga,
and we're 2 engineering students at UC Davis. We're working on a project to remotely measure the depth to groundwater, and we believe in a way that has never been done before. We're currently speaking with Yolo County Water District, and we're looking to expand our prototype into piloting at other groundwater counties. And so we're here just to ask that if anyone has any information that could be beneficial to us about other groundwater counties that'd be interested, or the USGS, or anything of the sort, we'd love to speak with you, and we really appreciate any time you guys have. Thank you very much.
No, thanks. What is the technology you're using?
So it's using ultrasound to actually measure pressure and depth in wells. Right now, right now we're focused on government research and keeping track of all the wells in their county, but it can be expanded to private use.
And what's unique about it is that although the technology somewhat exists, we can do it at a much cheaper rate. We can do it using cellular data, so it can be expanded to all wells, not being limited by a power source. And we're creating a database that's all-inclusive, so once you become part of the database, you can see data from all other water counties to help expand the data acquisition all around California and Oregon.
That's great. I'm trying to somehow to connect. I'm trying to figure out. I was thinking Eric, but someone who can connect you with the folks in our groundwater shop. So do we have volunteers over there? Okay, Diane will do it. Great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks. That was fun. That's what public comments were. Both of those. That was good. That was good. And I'll refrain from doing my ecosystem management speech. I can do the 5-minute, the 20-minute, the hour-long lecture, and the full week training program, if you'd like. All right, next we'll consider the minutes of the March 20th board meeting. I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
All right, any additions or corrections?
Just one abstention.
Hi there? I think I was there.
I wasn't there. I'm abstaining.
I know. I'm trying to figure it out. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Carries. Uncontested item number 2 remains uncontested. Doesn't mean it's not important. Just means we're going to move through the other items on the agenda. Do I have a motion?
I'll second. I'll acknowledge the comment letter from Siskiyou County and encourage staff to continue to work with them. They really have an open door. We went up there a few months ago, and it's a real opportunity to do joint fact finding. So I encourage you to be responsive to that letter, and with my second.
Excellent. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Item number 3, hydrologic conditions.
Good morning. My name is Vadim Demchik, engineer with the Division of Water Rights, and with me today is Chris Kwan, also within the division, and we're here to present item number 3, the hydrology update for the Bay Delta watershed. So we'll be taking a look at what happened so far in the water year. The graphics here are from the Climate Engine, which is a handy tool for spatially showing weather and climate conditions on the left-hand side.
Nice you changing it up.
Yeah,
Appreciate
you have
that.
to do things a little bit differently sometimes. Yeah, on the left-hand side is precipitation % difference from average. And of course, we were below average throughout the region due to that anomalous blocking high-pressure ridge, which diverted all the storms to the north. And of course, looking at the right-hand side is that snow water equivalent difference from average. Things are deep below normal in terms of snowpack conditions for southern Sierras all the way to southern Cascades. And of course, things significantly improved in March. These graphs are through March 22nd. We had about 3 really good storms come through, 2 of which were atmospheric rivers that yielded great precipitation throughout central coast of California, Sierra Nevadas. Of course, the southern region is still below average for precipitation in March. And on the right-hand side, we did have some improvement, some of that brown color that you saw in the previous slide. Let me go back. Improved just a bit, not too much. It's still below average for a lot of that region, but we did make a pretty good dent in the snow deficit, which really improved the magnitude or decreased the magnitude of the snow drought conditions in California. Here's a look at precipitation numbers. For the Northern Sierra, we're at 79% of average for this date. And if you look at that dark blue line, it is at 33.9 inches. For Central Sierra, we're at 25.7 in the dark blue line and 78% of average for this date. And for the Southern Sierras, we're at 63% of average for this date, 14.9 inches. So even though we had a lot of precipitation in March, it still wasn't near record territory.
I was reading something this morning that said, obviously, we'd like to be above the light blue line every time we can, but that this is way better than it was a month ago, so I'm not complaining. But that it's likely to be a dry year.
Oh, yes.
Is that
definitely
officially a dry year?
It's forecasted. The index is dry conditions. Here's the snow water content as of last Thursday. 2018 in the dark blue line going from top to bottom is North, Central, and Southern Sierras. And right now we're at 57% average for this time of year. Again, we had a lot of snow, or somewhat, in March, but we're still in that snow drought condition, the dry snow drought condition. This is a look at reservoir conditions as of last Friday. Most of the reservoirs are either at or above historical average, shown in the red lines. Kachuma Reservoir, 38% of capacity and 45% of average. Diamond Valley Lake at 89% of capacity. San Luis, 96% of average, and the state share is at 82% of operational capacity, and the federal share at 89% of operational capacity.
Does anyone have a sense of why? I mean, this time there was, and there'll be, another set of rainstorms next week, thank heavens. Although perhaps warmer than we would like. But this time again, there was another storm that went through the Central Coast, and it seems like Kachuma just doesn't improve. Is there like a watershed that, has an umbrella on top of it or something? Does anybody know why Kachuma just doesn't improve even when it rains?
I'll have to take a look at that to
See if you can figure out who to ask.
Yeah.
It sort of makes no sense to me. I'm sure there's an answer, but.
Okay. And this figures by the California-Nevada Climate Applications Program, which gives us a more holistic look of the entire system overall. It looks at snowpack normals plus reservoir normals, and it compares it to what's been going on this year. The yellow line is reservoir plus snowpack for this year. If you notice here, we've made some gains in March. Thankfully, thanks to a successful 2017 water year and a pretty wet March, our reservoirs reached about their normal peak in that red line. However, we're still below normal when it comes to reservoir plus snowpack normal, shown in that gray shaded area. So the wetness in March pushed a section of northeastern California out of abnormally dry conditions. Since the last update, severe drought has decreased considerably for the Central Coast and San Joaquin Valley, and extreme drought moved over to Imperial County.
That's where having really senior water rights really helps you out.
This forecast comes from the Climate Prediction Center, and this map shows the likelihood of temperature being above, below, or normal scenarios. Short-term outlook is showing higher odds of warmer than normal temperatures with no clear signal in the Shasta region shown in the gray. And precipitation, we are favored to be above normal precipitation for the top half of the state, and it going either way for the bottom half of the state. And this concludes my portion of the brief. We are here to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you very much. Questions?
Just qualitatively, does warmer temperatures plus some average precipitation have impacts on the storage picture for this year? You know, with warmer temperatures, does that affect our ability to store water in reservoirs in a more time release fashion versus, you know, the rapidity of snow melt?
For the lower elevations, definitely that makes a difference. So for warmer temperatures, when there's precipitation, we don't get that snowpack. And there were some other figures that I could have provided, which basically shows that difference in elevation. As you go up, you see that storage significantly drop as you go down in elevation. Yeah.
Right. Looking forward to what we get next week and seeing whether it's a mixed bag or it's helpful. But thank you very much. Thanks for changing up the visuals, too.
Yeah, that was an excellent graphic with the storage with reservoirs plus snowpack. That was one of the best I've seen.
All right. And back by popular demand, item number 4, water conservation update. Sorry, and I don't think we thank you enough for the excellent work you've been doing on this. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Chair Marcus, members of the board. Yelena Hartman, Senior Scientist in your Office of Research Planning and Performance. And just to be clear, I'm just here speaking for people who actually are doing the work. Californians are the ones who use the water and who conserve when we have brilliant results to report. So I will
warn you, there are a
some...
couple slides I'm going to want you to linger on a little bit.
Okay.
When we get to them, so just to let you know.
Well, the 45th month for which we have data is February 2018, and so I will provide a quick update. We've seen the slide, just previous presentation, and it's the 8-station index for Northern Sierra precipitation, but the story is similar for Central and Southern Sierra. I will just use this one. And the bold blue line is the 2018 year, so we are not actually interested in current daily precipitation. This is a few days old. What I actually would like us to look at is February. So actually, it might be hard to see on this chart, but it's the flat part of the line. And February of this year was essentially dry, except the last day of the month when we started to usher a feast of storms that we've seen throughout March. And actually, this chart is customized to show only our drought years. And so let's just look at from top down. 2017, last year, the record wet year, it essentially wouldn't stop raining. So we see that incline in February just shoot up. 2016 also had precipitation in February, but I do want to point out the red line for 2013. It's the baseline year against which we compare water production each year, each month. And so that red line is kind of intersecting with the pink line, but even that red line shows some stepwise movement, and there was some precipitation in 2013. 2015 had these spurts of wet and then dry, but none of these years during the drought actually had this flatlining in February the way we had this year. And I really just wanted to point that out, that it's an interesting way of looking at the conditions and what we get. And to your point, Chair Moore, precipitation, not just temperature, will affect our storage and how much we pull out of it. So for February, we have reporting that's staying stable. In fact, we've had a great effort by staff and also by associations to encourage members to report. So we have 93% of suppliers reporting, 28 elected not to report. The key message here on this slide, however, is that water production in February 2018 was up. Compared to the baseline water production in February 2013, it's 1% up for the suppliers that's reported to us in both periods. So we do have 7% of suppliers that didn't submit reports, but without those reports, when we compare, we are up. A large number of suppliers, more than 40%, reported no savings in February. And then we have about a third that reported savings between 0 and 10%, and then less than 20% actually were reporting savings that were above 10%. And putting that into the production context, 2018 was 110.4 billion gallons for February. And although here on this chart, it looks like it's below the blue shaded area, which is the 2013 baseline, again, with those additional 7% of the reports, it's probably right around there. We have started to show.
Can we go back to that one? That's where I wanted to stop here for a second.
Okay.
A couple of these just to think about it, because people jump to the 1 month conclusion. I'm not going to be an apologist for where we are. I would rather have a reduction, even though there are arguments. I mean, I'm always worried about it. But I think the key when I looked at this before the meeting is obviously the winter months, the last 3 in particular we've had, are the ones where there tends to be less water use. And that mountain you see of water use is those spring to summer months when people are using water on their lawns. Those are the months where this line goes is going to tell us a lot more than it tells us in the preceding 3. And so while I do think, I saw a sign I think it was from Cape Town, that said, waste it today, regret it tomorrow. Given that we know that we can have droughts that last multiple years, if that line starts going right back up to where we were as we get into those months where people are trying to make their lawn a certain color versus just trying to keep their trees alive, which I think they should, that's when we start to worry about it.
Absolutely.
But that mountain is that bulge is the thing we're looking at.
I think that's exactly the point, that the part of the year when it's hottest and when it's driest is when we're compelled to use the most water. And so that's when we need to make sure that at that point in time, we're not using more than needs to be used. And it really is about these off time periods that we should be investing in changes that once the dry and hot comes, we're prepared. And so we're not then struggling to do some sort of emergency conservation versus having already laid out our measures and our thinking that we should be wise about this and make conservation a California way of life.
That was excellent discussion.
Yeah.
If you go back one, I want to appreciate the analysis here where if you go back one more graph, where you had, I'm sorry, the one with the snapshot of February through the hydrograph. One more. Yes. So this is an excellent picture of the single month comparison. So I just want to emphasize that if you look at our baseline, yeah, it was flat, it was dry, and so it's a good comparison, and yet there was more water in the system, and so there was less demand for keeping the lawns and other vegetation going during a dry winter period. And we talked about this last month a little bit. There is such thing now as a second dry season, since the turn of the century. There's a bimodal hydrography, according to Michael Anderson, the climatologist of Department of Water Resources. And so, to keep lawns going, to keep landscaping going, there's going to be these intermittent summer-like irrigation patterns in our state that we need to manage. So this, by comparison to 2013, you see that there's a logic that there'll be more demand in this winter dry season period that we're looking through this snapshot. It's interesting how February captured that dry period completely. So this is actually good data to review in terms of our performance. But to your point, yes, it brings up, it explains, the lack of performance and conservation in our state in February, and yet it is a great warning sign to this state about as we move into the summer, we're all watching, the public is watching, citizens of California are watching to see how we do and meet the challenge, because the preceding discussion about our vulnerability to adequate storage cannot be overstated. And so I appreciate that discussion, Chair Marcus. A very important warning looking ahead in terms of climate change and being prepared. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I do want to thank you for pointing out looking forward, because if February precipitation line was flat, it's not going to be a surprise. We know in the summer it will be flat. I mean, we can look at past years, but we know in California we do not get precipitation in the summer, and that's when we're going to be driven to use most water. And with climate change, expecting to see these periods of no precipitation, I mean, that's what we should be looking ahead to. On this slide, we just kind of wanted to, in some way, contextualize our results, to remove the influence of the missing reports, and also to kind of make it closer to what we at home can do in terms of showing the residential use per person per day. In February of this year, it was 76 gallons per person per day. And so on this chart, the vertical axis is really what matters. There's no meaning on the horizontal axis. So the size of the boxes horizontally does not matter. It's really what the range is, what the stretch is. And this year, we have been at the top of what we've seen in February, maybe just a hair under 2013. But for 2013, it really is an estimate. We don't have reliable data on a supplier level, but aggregated across the state, we really came close to what it was in 2013 with much less precipitation.
That's a good one too. Thank you.
And so looking at hydrologic region averages, how this 76 statewide breaks down, we are up about a third compared to last year, which was actually when we set the record low use ever statewide. It was 1/3 higher, but we were so dry. And of course, there are regions where the use remained relatively low and comparable to past years, so northern areas, and some even used less than before, for example, North Lahontan. But as we move southward, southern parts of the state is where really this use ticked up quite a bit due to the conditions, most likely. But we need to remember that we must counter this increased demand driven by dry and warm conditions. We need to counter that by our conservation, both awareness and thinking, but also measures that are permanent solutions in terms of using water wisely. With that, I will just outline our next steps. We know that outreach to encourage reporters to submit their reports works. It's effective, so we'll continue to encourage reporting. We have also started to engage in earnest with the stakeholders to inform the water loss regulation, because water loss control is one of the easiest and smartest ways to conserve water. But it also extends infrastructure life, also avoids property damage. I mean, it's really like stretching our supply while fixing infrastructure. So we had a stakeholder meeting in March, and then 3 more are coming throughout the year. In May, there's going to be a meeting in San Francisco, in August in Los Angeles, and then in November back in Sacramento. And as this process unfolds, you will hear more probably towards the end of the year. And so hydrologic conditions, we now know at the peak of the snow water content of April 1st, we are just about a half statewide, but we continue to watch what's going on because precipitation is such an important driver. And again, to kind of reiterate, our challenge is with climate change coming, but also the way our conditions are today, to do whatever we can to make conservation a California way of life, which means put in durable measures that make us use water efficiently and rethink our water use so that we are smart about it.
That's great. It's like developing a new kind of hydrologic for folks in the state to become more aware that dry doesn't mean water more, and that we can always be in the beginning of the next longer drought, and that all the water that we have now may be all the water that we have for a lot longer than one season. And I think that we have to hit that on multiple levels, the legislation, of course, and all the good work you've been doing, and trying to bolster some of the public awareness campaigns, both with Save Our Water and at the local level. But I think the hydrology report is sobering. It's so much better than a month ago that you want to breathe a sigh of relief, but we're still way below average. C- or a D year, better than an F, and better than what we went through, but still nothing to be profligate in our water use about. I mean, I'm trying to figure out, it's no miracle march. Is it a merciful march? Is it a middling march? Is it, I don't know. But I really appreciate your approach. The approach is figuring out how to do it more permanently. So thank you. Very well said.
Very great. The California Data Collaborative was doing a contest for trying to get folks to get excited about conservation back in September or August. And the person at Stanford Business School came up with a slogan that was 15 minutes of your sprinklers is the same as a 6-hour shower. And something like that. And it might have been 5 hours or 4 or something like that. But the point is the outdoor irrigation is such a big deal, and that's the areas that aren't so essential. So sure, take shorter showers, but realize that, you know, it's going to take a lot of those showers to make up for your front yard that you just look at.
And please do shower.
But yeah.
Often enough.
I think
just a personal request.
That was one of our messages from the previous drought. We'll re-emphasize.
I like that slogan. I might put it on the slides next time.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Item number 5. Well, that's pretty. Yes, we've got our Stormwater All-Stars. As my grandmother would say, it's nice looking on you.
Good morning, Board Chair Marcus, Vice Chair Moore, and members of the board. And congratulations, Board Member Escobar, on your confirmation. My name is Annalisa Kihara. I'm Chief of the Stormwater Planning Unit in the Division of Water Quality, and I'll be doing a brief staff presentation on this item for you today. With me, I have to my left, Phil Wiles with the Office of Chief Counsel. To my right, I have Jeff Brousseau with the California Stormwater Quality Association. To his right, I have Laurel Wardrip, Chief of the Industrial and Construction Stormwater Unit in the Division of Water Quality. And to her right is Sean Bothwell with the California Coastkeeper Alliance. And I don't know if I have the, can I get that? Thanks. So for this presentation, I'll just be providing a brief background on this item and how it became a proposal for the board, a quick description on the Stormwater Authority, as well as common questions that were received by staff and the answers to those questions. The strategy to optimize resource management of stormwater was approved by the board in January of 2016. And during consideration of the stormwater strategy, there was a lot of conversation about the need for a level of an advisory level group that would be created to provide input and recommendations as we implement the stormwater strategy projects. So soon after approval of the STORMS document, we created the STORMS Core Implementation Committee. That is an external coordinating and advisory body that provides input and recommendations on our Phase 1 projects. So the Phase 1 projects are our 9 initial projects that we are implementing as part of the stormwater strategy. Representatives of the Core Implementation Committee come from the California Coalition of Environmental and Economic Balance, CEB, the California Coastkeeper Alliance, CCKA, the Association of California Water Agencies, AQUA, California Stormwater Quality Association, CASQA, and last but not least, the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, CASA. So this group meets quarterly. The group comes together and meets with Stormwater Planning Unit staff as well as executive sponsors for storms, and we discuss projects ways that our core implementation committee members can help champion the projects, whether or not subcommittees, so a larger group of stakeholders should be put together to provide additional input on some of our storms projects. And most recently, our group came together and we had a really great conversation about some of the needs and recommendations that are coming out of current stormwater strategy projects that we are implementing. A couple of them are our project to support funding of stormwater programs as well as stormwater projects. And then another one is our project to support stormwater capture and use statewide. So during this meeting, we had a great conversation about additional, actually, phase 2 and 3 projects as well that we are looking to implement starting in 2019. So the group recognized the potential multi-benefit from coordinated financial support of some of these projects and programs, and also discussed methods to share resources to benefit statewide programs. And that led to this proposal for the board.
Yeah, I just want to make note, the visual here of the opposite of silo, which is, that you have the water infrastructure, the wastewater infrastructure, and the stormwater infrastructure all represented on this
Right.
graph. And,
yeah, it's been a very effective group.
Yeah. Plus the others are important too, but just wanted to point out the infrastructure symbolism here.
I know, we've got to find a flood control group, though.
Yeah.
So
They're kind of part of the Casqua side, but you're right. Very good point.
So the proposal before the board today
Oh, and there you go.
is the Stormwater Authority. This is a joint powers agreement between the State Water Board, the Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control District, and the Alameda County Flood Control and Water Conservation District. And I also wanted to point out that we do have representatives in the audience today from both districts as well, and I want to thank them for being here. The purpose
You got to
of-
find them a logo. That's
We
all.
should. Well, we will add one.
Little joint logo there.
The purpose of the authority is to assist with the sharing of resources to benefit regional and statewide stormwater management programs. So functions that we've identified include, but are not limited to, providing research, providing technical guidance, and improving public access to funding and tools, and overall to assist and inform permittee compliance and to advance stormwater programs. So we received 4 public comment letters. 2 were in support of formation of the Joint Powers Authority. The other 2 were from the general public expressing overall concerns about the use of government funds, where this authority would actually provide a method for efficient and effective use of funds through cost sharing for multi-benefit projects. We also received additional questions as staff, and these questions we thought were important enough to share with the board today on this slide. The first is why have only 2 local agencies committed to be signatories, and the response to that is because it only takes 2 to create the authority. So the authority will be formed in accordance with Government Code Section 6503.5 and .6. And since it only takes 2 to form the authority, the water boards worked with Casqua to identify and to work with agencies that can work through their governing body and become party to an agreement. What we envision is that once the authority is created, that additional agencies will be added. The second question received, how would other agencies in the stormwater join the Stormwater Authority? And any public agency that is directly or indirectly authorized to implement measures that would regulate stormwater quality and quantity may join upon authorization by its governing body, amendment of the agreement by each signatory, and execution of the agreement. So that's just the process for others who may be interested. How will Stormwater Authority projects be identified and funded? So the short answer to that is that it would be identified and funded through contributing agencies. So an analogy to that would be that the contributing agencies would be clients and the Stormwater Authority would be like a consultant that would implement the project and then answer to the contributing agencies through the Joint Powers Authority Board of Directors. How can non-public agencies provide input on the projects and programs supported through the Stormwater Authority? So what we've envisioned is expanding the role of the Storm's Core Implementation Committee so that they would not only provide input and recommendations on stormwater strategy specific projects, but also to provide input because they give a broad stakeholder kind of perspective to many of the projects that we implement. So we'd like to kind of keep with that progress and use them to provide input as the Stormwater Authority considers projects. And then we also envision that advisory level groups would be created for each project, study, or program that the authority funds. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Jeff Brousseau. Jeff Brousseau is a representative of CASQA, and what we have envisioned is that CASQA would be the initial administering entity, and so Jeff would be providing an overview of the Stormwater Authority governance, and then Jeff is going to be followed by Sean Bothwell, who'd also like to share some of his thoughts on the authority as well.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Annalisa. Good morning, Board Chair Marcus and board members. I'm Jeff Brousseau, Executive Director for the California Stormwater Quality Association, or CASQA. Thank you for considering the creation of this JPA. It has been a long time coming. I think the idea first started in 2010, so maybe we'll finish it before the end of the decade. But it's very gratifying to see it get to this step, obviously. I'm just going to walk you through this chart here, which Annalisa, which covers some of what Annalisa already said, which is we've got 3 potential signatories: Alameda, Fresno, and the State Water Board. Fresno is listed as a designated agency because under the government code, one of the agencies, in terms of what kind of power is exercised by the JPA, is defined by who is a designated agency. And so Fresno has volunteered to be the designated agency. And so whatever their powers are in terms of contracting and that kind of thing, we would follow their procedures. Of course, they form the board of directors for the JPA itself, the California Stormwater Authority. And then we obviously envision this to be a very sort of project and program-oriented organization, very focused on kind of lean and efficient, just trying to get projects done, studies done, programs done that we haven't been able to get done otherwise. Other parts of that chart show that, as Annalisa said, we're looking at the Storms Implementation Committee as being kind of a permanent advisory body to the JPA board. And then CASQA has volunteered to as well as provide resources to become what's called the administrating entity under the government code, basically staffing the entity. And then we're looking, besides the opportunity for input from the Storms Implementation Committee, we're also assuming that the different projects and studies and programs would often have some kind of advisory body, whether it's a stakeholder group or a technical advisory committee, peer reviewers, or maybe all 3, depending on the nature of the project as well. So a lot of places for input overall. As I said, CASQA has been very involved in this, and I think it's because we were probably the first organization to sort of identify what the problem was, which was it's really hard to combine people's money together into a project. It sounds like it should be very simple to just pass the hat, and it is simple to pass the hat, but whether people put money into it or not is a whole other question. And we found that actually was quite difficult, and then when we asked the question, they said, well, you might want to consider forming a joint powers authority, because it's much easier for our agencies to give money to that kind of organization than it is to try and combine it with another organization's money. And so that's really the whole impetus behind the program. CASQA is very interested in keeping this very lean and mean, if you will. We want to make sure that it stays efficient and really is focused just on projects and programs and studies. I'm personally a big proponent that every issue kind of has this natural geographic size or scale. And then a lot of our problems in stormwater really should be addressed on a statewide basis as opposed to city by city or county by county. And this would be obviously provide a way for that to happen much more easily and efficiently and effectively. So that's why we're excited about it. And I think with that, I'll pass it on to Sean for some of his thoughts.
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning, Chair Marcus, board members. My name is Sean Bothwell. I'm the Policy Director for California Coastkeeper Alliance. We're here today cautiously very supportive of this authority. We think this could be an excellent opportunity to be able to provide funding, to do guidance and provide resources to permittees to help with permit compliance. The reason I say cautiously, and this gets back to some original concerns that we had, was we didn't want to see this authority being used to delegate the State Water Board's own responsibilities to CASQA or whoever are some of the other members to be able to develop that type of technical guidance that permit writers might be using. So that's where the cautiously piece comes into it. But I think having the Storms Implementation Committee with that advisory role really makes us feel a lot better about the JPA. The implementation committee to date has been a real great forum to share ideas and kind of listen to everyone's issues. And I think the implementation committee will work well as that advisory body to make sure that the resources are used in a responsible manner. And so with that, I just want to thank staff for their patience in putting up with me and listening to my concerns over the last year. Thank you.
I'll take cautiously supportive.
Okay.
I think that's appropriate. I might have that on my tombstone. Right?
Good morning, Phil Wiles with the Office of Chief Counsel. So if there aren't any further questions, I don't know if there are any speaker cards. Staff has prepared a resolution for the board to adopt to help create the formation or form this Joint Powers Authority.
Thank you. We do have one speaker, Alan Hoffman from Fresno Metro Flood Control. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for doing this, more importantly.
Chair Marcus, members of the board, I thought it important that as a designated agency that I've learned our agency has stepped up to be, that I speak to you a little bit just so you understand why our agency would do this on behalf of CASQA. We were formed as a special district back in 1956 as a part of our tagline, capturing stormwater since 1956. That's what we do. We capture stormwater from a very flat Central Valley, a city, and all we do is capture, retain it, and try to put as much as we can to beneficial use. Our city was, and our agency was involved with EPA in one of the very first true studies of stormwater quality in the NERP program back in 1979, and we took part in that for 4 years. We were also instrumental in a founding member of the California Stormwater Task Force, as you might remember, with Doug Harrison as our general manager, which later in 2002 became CASQA. And so we have been very involved with that. I have with me Daniel Rourke, who, as my environmental manager, has been very active in CASQA and back in the days of the Stormwater Quality Task Force. So with that, being signatory to this, we just want to know that we are in support of your affirmative action on this morning.
Enthusiastically supportive as opposed to cautiously supportive.
We believe in stormwater. I've been doing stormwater going on my 39th year with this agency. So we believe very strongly in what we do to help the state learn how to capture stormwater and put it back in the ground as recharge. So with that, I thank you for allowing me to comment.
Thank you very much for that and for all the work. That was perfect. Thank you. All right, with that, do I have a motion? You can ask as many as you want.
Thank you. No.
Mr. Stormwater,
no,
yeah.
It's Mr. Stormwater. That you just heard from Mr. Stormwater.
Yeah.
I'm just one of his followers. So I just wanted to. This is a novel arrangement, right? How many JPAs are we part of, Counselor? 3 or 4. So it's not the first time. So it's a tool we're familiar with. I was, you touched on other agencies and the benefits to them. And so I just want to give you an opportunity to explain a little more. For instance, what's an example project that, Fresno and Alameda, and we're interested in seeing get off the ground, but hasn't been able to, and how would it benefit folks other than Alameda and Fresno?
So I'd like to share maybe just one example that came up recently during our core implementation committee, actually maybe 2, and then I'll pass it to Laurel if she wants to add on from a permitting compliance perspective. But in the core implementation committee and through our stormwater strategy projects, we've identified a project to, and it's simple as just providing a website for resources for stormwater funding. So, having a repository that actually identifies local, state, federal funding, and then tools for, municipalities when they're setting their fees. And there isn't one that kind of brings it all together. But through our subcommittee that is actually chaired by Sean Bothwell as a champion of that specific project, the group has identified the need for that. However, you can't necessarily just have funding for creation of the website. The website is only as effective as it is implemented and then updated, because things change. So this was one of the first projects that I had identified would be great if it could be funded through something like a stormwater authority, where it's a win-win on both ends. It's up-to-date information that would be helpful for the municipalities and would be helpful for the water boards to, link to on our web pages as well.
So, good morning. One project that would be interesting, or maybe two, is one kind of using Caltrans as a model. I know they're not in the JPA, but their Protect Every Drop campaign, where it was a agency and a public benefit. So a project, for example, trash or some type of pollutant that is ubiquitous in the state, it would be helpful to have a project like that this could benefit from, multiple agencies funding something like that. Something more close to permitting would be the Qualified SWIP Developer and Qualified SWIP Practitioner training. I could see that training being expanded and maybe repackaged so that the public could actually access some of that material, and it would be something the state has more ownership of, and we could look at that through a JPA. And that's through the construction stormwater permit. Right now, it's California Stormwater Quality Association funds that entire training program. And it'd be nice to share some of that, like we've done with the Qualified Industrial Stormwater Practitioner training.
Those are great examples. Getting off the ground, you have to have a nucleus to get it going, as you pointed out. What are the advantages of other agencies joining versus, just benefiting from this vehicle? I mean, what are the incentives to join? And does that become kind of an administrative challenge if there's too many, or is that even an issue?
Weird question.
Yeah, I think it's, in terms of benefits to other agencies of joining, I think first of all, it brings them much closer to the actual projects that are going on. I mean, we're assuming that the projects will come to the JPA through other agencies. And so if you're on the board of directors, obviously you have some hand in how that project plays out and what the results are. And also maybe have the first chance to suggest new projects for the JPA as well. Administratively, I don't, I guess it depends how big the number becomes, but right now that doesn't sound like, three board members doesn't sound too bad. If it gets up to, 20 or 30, maybe that becomes a bit of a challenge administratively. But right now, again, we're trying to keep it very focused and lean and mean, and really focus on just the projects and programs and minimizing the administrative burden that it might be. We're not trying to create a whole another agency necessarily, although we are, but it's going to be very project focused and like.
Yeah, I'm hearing that you don't need to be a member to benefit. That this is really, and that's where the state's role, helps in terms of, realizing based on the feedback we get what the needs are out there in a very highly underfunded enterprise of stormwater and the need to really have state assistance. Last question, how do the regional water boards plug into this administrative structure?
We have representatives from at least a couple of the regional boards as executive sponsors or as team members that attend our Storms Core Implementation Committee meetings. We also provide updates during our regular quarterly meetings for overall stormwater strategy projects, efforts, and then for just the stormwater program. So I envision that as projects are coming up, we'd be providing very general updates to the regional boards in that larger level. However, I also feel like, as we develop advisory level groups for specific projects, we would be identifying specific regional boards that would, potentially be part of those advisory groups and specific staff that we'd like to have provide input as well as we implement projects and programs.
Or I can't resist.
Stuff.
So I have the counselors here, and our from the legal standpoint. Isn't this a reasonable response in some ways administratively of our agency and partner agencies to the concern about unfunded mandates? We don't have a great local revenue stream to do stormwater infrastructure. We get that. it's created controversy. Forming this type of a organization, is it a reasonable response to that concern, in terms of trying to share information, make local programs more efficient, and take away the burden on individual cities and locales? Because I know it's hanging out there, and this, to me, seems like a very constructive organizational response to that challenge.
It's certainly helpful and good sound public policy. I wouldn't want to sugarcoat it and think that in any way it addresses or ameliorates the concerns associated with unfunded mandates, but to the extent that we can better target resources, that helps the local agencies and in the end may ultimately help the state as well. It's certainly not one of our motivations for this, though.
As we heard, it's been going on for years, recognizing the value of an administrative tool. But I just have to say, I have attended the Core Implementation Committee meeting, finally at long last, right? And I know the board member Dodek has, and I'm very impressed with it. And I just remember during the stormwater strategy discussions, from a couple of years ago, the promise of this type of committee for us to really band together from our different perspectives, recognizing the underlying challenge of working with the public to communicate the importance of this infrastructure for our quality of life and public safety and all of those important issues. And that we're better off working together, local, state, federal, nonprofit, industrial, et cetera, so that we can do a good job of explaining to the public the importance of these investments. So I'm just really happy about how the implementation committee has come together, how it's functioning, and how it is integral to this proposal before us.
I want to say thanks to staff for all their great work on this, and I guess just add to questions at this point. What role and how do you see GSAs sort of fitting in with this work? Because I think obviously a lot of the groundwater sustainability agencies out there are also sort of working in this space and interested in these same sort of issues, particularly around the permitting of projects, and really when we look at the number of projects across the state that we're going to need to engage in. How do sort of GSAs sort of fit in there? And then also on the concerns from the public about transparency and another entity and sort of confusion within that. Is the GSA going to have sort of a site that better explains what's going on a sort of meeting by meeting basis, et cetera, and just improve that transparency, I guess, for the public?
So from a GSA perspective, I've had a lot of conversation with various board members as well with kind of bringing the GSAs together. And in the future, a lot of the stormwater resource planning efforts that are taking place, in different watersheds, it's the same watershed where, you have some GSAs that are being created as well. So, the hope is that, there would be coordination in that aspect, because what we capture as stormwater and put into the ground is part of that balance and that accounting for how much water is in there and how much is being pulled out. That's a great question, actually, for GSAs as well, because, I feel that there will be projects, because we're looking at not only water quality, but actually water supply, where we would want to include representatives from, a GSA as either at an advisory level role or, potentially maybe considering being a part of the authority as well, or supporting funding of projects. In terms of kind of public transparency as well, we have a website that's dedicated to the creation of the Stormwater Authority, where we would have information. I can also coordinate with my counterpart in the Office of Research Planning and Performance as well to make sure that we're kind of connecting and we have links that are connecting with one another so we can point interested parties in the same direction.
I believe with the creation of this agency, there's a public process built into the requirements for having the joint powers agreement. I don't have all the specifics, but there will be a public process for when projects come to that board, and maybe there's information items that come to this board, and Karen Larson or someone from Division of Water Quality would be on that board as well. So there'll be a connection to the work here in the public. I strongly believe in that.
Yeah, it might, I think it'd be worth having an update once the JPA is kind of up and running, and I'll leave it up to whatever the time frame. But I think it would be great to then hear how things are kind of going along at some point. And I'm sure staff would check in otherwise, but just want to put in my word for that being a good thing.
And I appreciate that. You know, when we created the storms document and the board approved of it, we did commit to providing info items. And so we are planning on an information item. And so what we'll do is include that as an update for the board as well for the next upcoming information item.
And this is a question I feel like I've asked it before, and I just apologize if I'm not remembering the answer. Would this be the place, or does Casqua have, or is there some other association that collects the great stories and examples of things people are doing on the ground? I mean, lately I've just been captivated by pictures of urban streetscapes and median design to capture. I mean, it's almost like, why not do that? Especially as we tussle over whether you should water a lawn in a median with recycled water or not. The question is, why don't we think of a 10 to 20 year time frame for transitioning all our streets into stormwater capture and retention bay? I mean, it sort of just makes sense, but they're really much more appealing. And so I've been focusing on the story and the visual of things lately. So is there someone who sort of, as people do these projects, captures them and gets those pictures up online so that other cities can go shopping and be inspired by it?
I would say not exactly. I mean, Casca does that to some degree on a more of an event basis. You know, our quarterly meetings, our conference and things, we highlight and spotlight different exemplary programs and projects. We also have an awards program, but those are sort of snapshots in time. There's no sort of permanent storyboard that everybody can go look at. So I think that would actually be a great project.
Pass that onto the list as something to think about.
Yeah.
I mean, because that then is a resource for folks to go sort of shopping with, or even just to expand their mind. I would think it'd be helpful for communities thinking about it, because you see communities that think about it as everything we do is a burden and it's going to cost all this money, as opposed to, why don't you take it and figure out how to make it work for your water pollution, and just urban quality of life needs. It's all an attitude about how you look at things.
Yeah, some of the stormwater programs have done sort of idea books where they have sort of case studies page by page. You know, here's what they did at this facility, here's what they did at this facility, to capture and use. So it's kind of that same idea.
There's the International Best Management Practice database that captures some of the more technical performance results from some of these installations. I think there's a lot of work trying to get that updated and enhanced. So if you're interested in the pictures, you could actually, over time, compare that in the perfect world, compare it to how it actually performed and how you'd install that at your city. Or
Yeah, it'd be nice to meld the two of them together.
Yeah, I think my original response was to look at previous California Stormwater Quality Association agendas for their yearly meetings, because they always highlight some really great stories. And then one of the things that we're doing with the Storms group is that we have a seminar series that we host. So usually when we catch wind of some really great stories with some really good examples and a great presentation, we usually reach out to the representatives to provide a presentation as part of the platform we provide with our seminar series.
Well, great. I'll get you a connection. I mean, Steve probably has it too for San Mateo.
That'd be great.
What made me think of it again was last Friday seeing a presentation where someone said exactly that. It said, well, we decided to look at it this way rather than that way. And then you see this picture of these transformed streets. You think, well, who wouldn't want to live on that?
Happy to host the next one coming up. We're coordinating with Sean Bothwell for a great story coming out of the Russian River watershed.
Oh, good.
And then we're also working with Molten Miguel Water District down in Southern California for a great sharing of what they're doing with conservation.
Well, that's terrific. Anything else before I ask for a motion? Well, is there a motion?
With thanks yet again to staff, so moved.
Enthusiastic second. Thank you for all your work.
Go ahead. You finish.
Despite the fact that there wasn't a ton of correspondence on this item, I know that many people out there are welcoming it, and thank you for your leadership in putting it together. And we look forward to those updates and the website work and everything else that's queued up thanks to this partnership.
Great. All in favor, however cautiously or enthusiastically?
Aye.
Aye.
Carries. Thank you all for the great work, and thank you. All right, now we are on to the update on our climate change work. I didn't take a break. Why don't I take a 5-minute break? Just a 5-minute break. We'll start in just a few. Sorry, I forgot about the break. I was just having so much fun.
Great.
All right. We are back at 10:54 for item number 6. Hi.
Good morning. We're here to update you on how we're doing on implementing the board's climate policy. Max Gomberg with the Office of Research Planning and Performance. With me today, to my left, Patty Kuyunjan, the Executive Officer of Region 6, who's going to talk about what their region's been doing. To her left, Jelena Hartman, who, in addition to being our water conservation superstar, was the prime impetus behind getting this resolution that we're discussing adopted. And then to her left, Kim Niemeyer from Office of Chief Counsel, who was also instrumental in developing this resolution. So we're going to talk to you about this resolution, which has 30 items. We're not going to go through all 30 of them, but we're going to hit the highlights of what's been underway over the past year and where we're going. So the climate change resolution, to summarize and recap, it has 30 items broadly in 3 categories, which you see up there, actions where the board can actually help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to then adapt to climate change and build resilience to climate change impacts, and then broadly support functions, which include financial assistance, our data work, public outreach, and the like. So for the global context and for the statewide context, I want to start with the latest and greatest in scary news, which is that the latest out of Antarctica is that the 10% of the entire continent of glaciers in Antarctica are in retreat.
Oh, that's
yeah, and that is just one of the many almost daily news stories now that are really tracking the significant and growing impacts of climate change. So California, being a leader, has adopted policies through legislation to try to reduce our statewide emissions. And you can see up on the graph there that we have a really steep decline necessary if we're going to actually hit those targets, which are part of what globally the science tells us we need to do to avert the worst impacts from warming and climate change. And so that's the large context. Most of the state's emissions come from the transportation, industrial sectors, but water is an important component of emissions related to electricity use, and we also have a role, as I'll get to in a minute, in reducing emissions associated with what are called short-lived climate pollutants, the really potent types of gases, methane, black carbon, and fluorocarbons. So we're doing some work there as well. So that's the broad stage. I'm going to pass it over to Jelena now to walk through what we've been doing.
Thanks, Max. Good morning. As Max said, we are looking in particular at the short-lived climate pollutants because they're so potent in the way they heat the atmosphere. And they're also short-lived, which means that once we cut emissions, we can see the benefit of cutting those emissions more quickly. So and I should say that everything I'm talking about today, again, is not the work that I've done, but it's the great work of all the people who come before you meeting after meeting and who work behind the scenes in regional boards and in all your offices and divisions. I just get to now show some of the highlights as a look back on the past year. And in terms of methane capture, you've heard at the previous board meeting an update on composting general order, which the Division of Water Quality people have been working together with Cal Recycle and with California Department of Food and Agriculture to support healthy soils. And so this is not only related to agriculture and good soils for them, but it also helps with the organics diversion goals to remove organic material from landfills where it would otherwise release methane, once it decomposes. So it's supporting that work that is in Air Board's short-lived climate pollutant strategy. Another thing that I wanted to highlight in terms of methane capture is that the State Water Board received a grant from United States Environmental Protection Agency to do research about co-digestion potential at wastewater treatment plants. And the reason this is really interesting is that the wastewater treatment plants typically will have an anaerobic digester where they digest their sludge, and there is a potential to accept some of the diverted organic matter from landfills. So the benefit is reducing those fugitive emissions from landfills. We also have a benefit of then actually generating biomethane, which wastewater treatment plants can use to offset their own external energy use. So it's kind of like a win-win, and we hope to really answer some of the questions. What is the current potential to do co-digestion, and what sort of investments would be needed to maximize this? Because this is also a benefit for the wastewater treatment plants, who can then free up capital to do other things, maybe improve the treatment or other things that they might want to do. So in terms of,
oh, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt. Okay. No, just a question when you're done with the thought.
Okay, I was going to move on to the next one. So if it's
no, just the I've heard a lot about the food waste work. Are there a lot of places doing this, or is this sort of in its infancy compared to the food waste diversion into the system?
So there is a goal. There is a bill, SB 1383, which has a goal to divert 20% of edible food waste. And actually, the first and foremost use of diverted edible food is for consumption, then to do other beneficial uses. The last ones are the ones that are least useful. So there is a lot of focus on minimizing the food waste. In fact, I think we've just gone through a campaign week in the past couple of weeks to reduce the food waste. And just the way there was that 15 minutes of irrigation is like a 6-hour shower.
Yeah.
There is a campaign which shows that 1 pound of such food thrown away is like a shower of this length. So for example, a pound of bananas is a 42-minute shower, and a pound of meat is 6-hour shower. I mean, so there's also that, trying to equate the value of food, both in terms of energy, greenhouse gas emissions, and water that's embedded to produce that food. So there's a strong focus in the state to minimize the food waste.
It's fascinating. And then the researching the co-digestion with, are you talking about green waste in this slide?
It's food waste. So
this food waste you're talking about. Okay, so it was food waste. That's where
the green waste, like the yard trimmings, wood chips, and things like that, would be more part of the composting general order.
That makes more sense to me. Okay, I was just confused. I'm glad I asked.
And I think Irvine Ranch, they have a project right now where they have a biodigester that they're co-locating next to their wastewater treatment plant to accept like fats, et cetera, to produce energy. I think that's one example of.
Yes, fats, oils, and grease are the highest value, have most energy in them, and they're easiest to add to a digester, but we're really looking at other food waste as well.
And to your question, Chair Marcus, East Bay Mud and a couple other agencies have been out in front on this issue. And so what we're looking at with this research project is what's the additional market opportunity? What are the economics of diverting this food waste, getting it to the wastewater plants? How do we do it without creating a whole lot of truck emissions, right, and impacting communities? So we're sort of looking at the whole picture, all the way from the food waste diversion through to the digestion, and then the resulting biosolids and what to do with those.
That's right. Just because the chemistry works in one place doesn't mean that overall it makes sense, kind of like a large corn-based play that wasn't the smartest one we ever did nationally.
Yeah, that would be important on scale, because when I was a consulting engineer, we learned there was a kind of a breaking point on microturbine, efficiency, and that treatment plants below a certain size really couldn't be successful. And so, yeah, the scale of the facility will probably play a role.
During the first year of state-mandated water conservation targets, California saved more than 1.6 million acre-feet of water. And actually, those water savings are related to indirect energy savings and then greenhouse gas emissions. And in fact, what's at the bottom of the slide is a paper that just recently came out in peer-reviewed journal, but it was a runner-up at the Water Board's data challenge a little while ago, which really put water conservation on the map in terms of the potential to, on this cold water side, so not at home when we are using energy to heat and use our water, but to get the water to us, cold water side, it really highlighted the benefit it can have for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so the 1.6 million acre feet during that 1 year of water conservation was significant energy savings equivalent to taking off more than 110,000 cars off the road for 1 year. So 500,000 metric metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. And because water loss control is one of the most effective ways to conserve water, we are also starting to work with stakeholders to inform water loss regulation. And as I actually already mentioned, we held a stakeholder meeting in March and more coming up this year. But we're looking to really work on this water loss piece because it's not only water conservation and stretching our supply, but it's protecting infrastructure, property damage, and it also can have greenhouse gas mitigation benefit.
How many cars off the road again?
110,000 cars. And the citation to the paper that actually summarized this and packaged this at the bottom.
Was that the UC Davis paper?
UC Davis paper, correct.
Yeah. You know, it was pretty incredible. They also found just the economics of then those energy savings rivaled any of the other energy programs that we actually have out there to specifically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So it's pretty cool.
And we spend as a state over $1 billion a year on energy efficiency programs broadly, and our economic analysis associated with the water conservation regulations showed conservatively that the economic losses to water agencies was somewhere in the 500 to 600 million range, and that doesn't account for the benefits as well. So definitely a much more cost-effective way of getting those savings.
As you're looking at water loss, you know how drinking water systems have pressure reduction valves, and so there is a possibility of energy capture. Is that an element that you're exploring with this too, in terms of, you know, clean energy, quote unquote, that otherwise is not being taken advantage of? I guess inline hydro or that sort of thing.
Yeah, so we're looking across all the range of technologies from detection to pressure management to infrastructure replacement as part of that work. And just to put it in context, there was a bill, SB 555, that passed a couple of years back that directed a more robust reporting and auditing of water losses from the large suppliers. We're now in a pre-rulemaking phase where we're engaging on those types of issues, and then the board is directed through the legislation to set performance standards by the middle of 2020. So we're leading up to that, and we'll probably hold a workshop to talk about where we're at towards the end of this year or the beginning of 2019 and cover those issues. And in fact, Vice Chair Moore, since I know this is an area you're interested in, we are planning a second workshop to be held in Oakland, probably at East Bay Mud, towards the end of May, early June, that will cover some of those pressure management topics. So we'll make sure if you can attend, that you do.
Well, thanks. And yeah, and I brought it up just because you're going in, you know, you're doing the system analysis for water loss. There may be, you know, this sort of co-benefit of looking at pressure reduction opportunities. Thank you.
So water conservation has this potential to in multiple ways, avoid emissions of greenhouse gases.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
I know. I like that. Recycled water is relatively energy intensive to achieve a certain quality in that treated water, but there are definitely areas in California where energy intensity associated with imported water supplies is greater. And so in those situations, recycled water has the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, this is not to forget the other benefits, which is the local water supply and in general supply resilience that the recycled water builds for a region. And so soon to be released, there is a draft amendment to the recycled water policy, which you will hear more about once it's out. But it would require annual reporting of recycled water by recycled water producers. And it will also update other reporting requirements to include relevant parameters such as constituents of emerging concern. And so Division of Water Quality Group is working both internally with Office of Information Management Analysis and our Division of Information Technology, and also externally, semi-internally with regional boards and then with the Department of Water Resources to develop recommendations for online data entry system, both in terms of the actual mechanism, how it would work, but also how to avoid duplicate reporting, what sort of types of recycled water uses to report, and things like that. So in terms of this particular directive that was in the resolution, there's a bit of kind of like correcting the course a bit because it's taking a while to develop this online system. And so although there was a target to report on amount and types of water uses sooner, reporting on that will follow once these recommendations and the system are implemented. And finally, mentioning the board action from last month, which was the adoption of surface water augmentation regulation, which is like an important step, really important step in promoting maximizing the value of the water resource that we have, and it set uniform standards for treating water that would be put into surface water reservoirs that are designated as drinking water source. So that's an important step towards promoting recycled water use in California as well.
I would just add or suggest that you add increasing use of recycled water by agriculture because it's less energy intensive.
Good point.
Absolutely.
Another place where Fresno is showing statewide leadership, besides the earlier items.
Yep. Fresno rocks.
I have nothing to add on this slide. Just kidding. I mean, the Stormwater Group does such brilliant work. In addition to everything you've heard, there is also a contract that has just been executed that will look into providing recommendations for stormwater capture and use calculation methodologies as related to green infrastructure and low impact development best management practices. And there is kind of like a gift that keeps on giving. Green infrastructure has such a variety of benefits, from stormwater capture and water supply to water quality improvement, flood attenuation, habitat, both stream and riparian, helping with the hydrograph, recreational uses, decreasing the urban heat island effect. I mean, it's really something that even if we can't quite quantify it right now, it seems to be one of those solutions that has so many benefits that even if we can't quite maybe quantify, which we might be able to do soon, there's a lot of work. It's worth doing that, and there's a lot of work that, as you heard from the Stormwater Group, is done to advance these stormwater capture practices. In the following fiscal year, Division of Water Quality will be working with our Office of Information Management and Analysis to develop a watershed level pilot project to identify data sources and to test methodologies to estimate stormwater capture. And these benefits might be on-site and also off-site, and to figure out how do these volumes change in time and with climate change. So there are a lot of questions to look into, but we know that this is one of the strategies that can help mitigate greenhouse gas emissions because it also creates that local supply.
I would just say this is an example of how we're trying to walk the talk on multiple benefits.
Yeah, the capture of the benefits, the quantification of those really is such a critical step to be able to incentivize investment, because absent that, you can't link the outcomes then to the investment, and if we can't connect those dots, you can't then encourage the sort of projects we really need to see. So that's great work.
And I absolutely agree. Quantifying will help then with funding. if we can demonstrate all the great benefits that come from these types of projects. And so, as Max mentioned, greenhouse gas emissions associated with water are dwarfed by transportation and industry, but it's important that within what we can do, we're doing our part. Because when we look at the future conditions that are projected with climate change, the biggest uncertainty comes not from data and from models, but from human behavior. If we look at projected temperature or sea level rise, there are different models and they're projecting different things, and the data kind of like create this cone of uncertainty as we go further into the future. But where these cones of uncertainty really start to diverge after 2050 is different emission scenarios. Emission scenarios, that's essentially the decisions we make to cut and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So if we can get a hold of that, we are on our way to really minimize the impact. And we know that even if we completely stop the emissions, there's going to be impacts that continue into the future. So we also have to prepare and we have to adapt to those impacts. And I will just turn over to some of the actions that the State Water Board is doing to prepare for those impacts. So we're now talking about adaptation and building resilience. And one of the things that the Division of Drinking Water has really taken up and is working hard is to enhance climate change readiness of the drinking water systems. Just a couple of weeks ago, they released the electronic annual report. So that's the EAR on the slide. It's an annual report that all water systems submit every year. And this year, climate change questions are added. And they're really meant to start the conversation, to get the water systems. And some of the really sophisticated water systems and big ones are already doing it. But we are also looking to help the smaller ones to think about it. What are their vulnerabilities to climate change? What are the impacts that will affect them, and how sensitive are they to them, and what are they doing? There's a lot of great work out there, what people are doing to adapt to climate change. So Drinking Water Group will also then use results from these electronic annual reports to craft sanitary surveys, which are actually done by district engineers. And they will start that conversation directly with the water systems. We're really thinking that this will help move those that maybe have not been yet spending time thinking about this. Drinking Water Group is also working with Office of Information Management and Analysis to make information available on a public portal. So they are thinking in which ways they can make this information that they collect make available to the public. And it could be also a great learning tool, because maybe I'm not exactly sure what somebody is doing, but it's a catalog of what are these other systems doing to adapt. So we don't know exactly what kinds of uses people will come up with, but we know that making those data available is power in itself. And Division of Drinking Water is also working with Division of Financial Assistance, which, as a part of Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, has capacity building funding. And they're working with technical assistance providers to include climate change workshops that are coming up, and to increase that training for awareness and readiness for the public water systems. So a lot of work to make sure that our drinking water systems are moving and adapting as we get more impacts from climate change. This applies to drinking water, but more broadly, one important piece is to address infrastructure vulnerability. And an important thing for us as a state is to ensure that land use planning is also coordinated with the water use planning. One of the important milestones was the adoption of this updated sea level rise guidance by the Ocean Protection Council in March of this year, which provides really stepwise directions to help with planning to sea level rise. So that's a really something that we have been looking forward to, and we've shared with the regional boards. But this work is definitely associated with other permitting agencies that have authority in the coastal zone and in the tidelands. So there's also conversation with the State Lands Commission and the California Coastal Commission to somehow streamline and coordinate our vulnerability assessment requirements, because as permitting agencies, those other agencies also require vulnerability assessments. And so we're looking to, in some way, either streamline it so that if somebody already did vulnerability analysis for those purposes, they don't have to duplicate that work for meeting our permit requirements. And so, which brings me to the last point, that recommendations for permit language to do vulnerability assessment and then to address identified vulnerabilities is forthcoming. In the resolution, this is scheduled for the summer of this year, but we have been hearing updates from MPDS roundtables and the stormwater planning groups, and they're doing a lot of work both with stakeholders and internally to gather different permitting language ideas. And so this is coming up, and it's probably better suited for one of the future updates. Given that the hot and dry climate drives water use demands, there is quite a bit of thought given to developing underutilized water resources and also to expand storage. So to highlight some of the work that's going on along those lines is the Division of Water Rights is working on the temporary water rights for underground storage and groundwater recharge during high flows. Again, going back to the surface water augmentation for using recycled water to place into reservoirs for drinking water. And finally, I want to also mention that the State Water Board was tasked to coordinate with the Department of Water Resources and California Department of Food and Fish and Wildlife, on quantifying the public benefit associated with water storage investment program. That was a Proposition 1 funding in the amount of $2.7 billion for storage, and our focus were water quality improvement benefits. So we actually did a lot of work on that. I'm not going to opine on the submitted proposals. That's yet to come from the Water Commission in the upcoming weeks. Which brings me to the final piece here, which is last but not the least in this part on adaptation, which is to protect and restore ecosystems. And I found it really inspirational to hear one of the MPDS section chiefs from the Division of Water Quality say last week at a data fair that was held at the Water Board, that she frequently reminds her staff that our job is not to write permits, but our job is to protect beneficial uses. And I really, really appreciated that, because that is really what this whole thing is about. And Division of Water Quality is moving to document enhancement of ecosystem resilience in all of their technical documents or in policies themselves that are going to be coming before the board. And similar to the stormwater, if we can quantify and document it, there's going to be easier ways of then actually supporting it and giving it additional funding or what other things might be helpful. There are also biostimulatory and biointegrity standards work that's coming up that is going to also help assess impacts of climate change in inland waters. And Office of Information Management Analysis is continuing its coordination through the Surface Water Monitoring Ambient Monitoring Program with Water Quality Monitoring Council to include climate stressors in future ecosystem assessments. But we know that the more healthy and more robust health of our ecosystems are, the better they will be in coping with the changes that are going to come with climate change. The final note actually here is that adaptation is always going to have to be a continuous process, and we're going to have to be flexible and iterative, because this work will never be done. There's always work to be done. So as we move forward, I wanted to highlight some of the support actions that have really contributed to furthering both mitigation and adaptation work. Division of Financial Assistance has really embraced all of the directives that have been in the resolution. Their intended use plans for state revolving funds now include climate change mitigation and adaptation benefit, and simple process that is now required for getting financing through state revolving funds now gives extra points for projects that advance those goals. And Division is also looking to expand those types of application requirements to other programs. There is also a lot of thought given to providing financial and technical support for permanent and sustainable solutions to small and disadvantaged communities. And our Office of Sustainable Water Solutions, that's within the Division of Financial Assistance, does a lot of work on that to promote both permanent wastewater and drinking water needs of communities that need it. And I already mentioned that there is work with the technical assistance providers to include information to help water systems increase their readiness to climate change impacts.
And I would just add there, climate change impacts fall on all of us, and we're already experiencing them, but they fall most significantly on communities that are already struggling, vulnerable communities, disadvantaged communities, whether they be inland communities that have suffered from lack of drinkable water or lack of water during the drought to coastal communities. And so one of the things we're being really mindful of as we look to implement this resolution is making sure that we are linking our climate change and our equity efforts, whether that's through the human right to water work, through our environmental justice work in general. So we're really trying to work hand in hand and make sure that we're building in equity into this climate change work.
And the final piece for this part is really about building trust and transparency through promoting open data. Office of Information Management and Analysis has made great strides, both in making our data available on open data platforms and using those principles, but also to acquire data from other organizations to make it available to the water boards. And as the requirements for permits get developed and as we start to receive these vulnerability assessments, there's going to be more need on training how to use the data and how to, in general, maximize the use of not just gathering new data, because there's always going to be questions that need to be answered, but also the data that we have. How do we look into what we have and make most of it? So great work, and there's a lot to be said about the civic engagement events that the office holds throughout the year. And so the final thing on this slide is a plug for an event coming up in June, which is going to be the third Water Board Science Symposium that this year has the focus on adapting in the face of disruptive landscape change, which is going to cover both long-term changes such as climate change, population growth, land use change, but also more rapid changes like fire and drought, floods. So with that, I will turn it over back to Max for additional previews.
So to sum it up, we've been doing a lot. There's been a lot of good coordination and work going on across the agency, across our divisions and offices. One of the areas where we still have work to do is on developing actual permit terms, and that is ongoing work across our divisions and the regional boards about what's appropriate and how we roll that out. And so when you hear from the regions over the rest of the year about what they're doing, and when we come back, that'll be an area where we definitely focus more, is on those actual regulatory requirements, because that is part of what we do. And then, of course, we are, as you heard, building out our data sets to really be able to understand at the statewide level what's going on. We know a lot now in terms of the science about how our hydrology is changing, but we don't have a statewide picture of how all of our 3,000 drinking water systems are working to adapt. All of our 900 wastewater systems are working to reduce vulnerability. As you heard in the earlier presentation, we don't have a statewide picture of what's going on in terms of the stormwater work. So we need to build all of that out so that we can really get a grasp on what's going on and where to focus. So those data collection efforts are ongoing as well.
Not to mention for the water rights side of that.
Not to mention for the water rights side as well. And so one of the upcoming deadlines for July 1 in the resolution is for the Division of Water Rights to look at their water availability analyses for permits, for the water rights permits, and see whether those need to be modified owing to climate change. So look for an update on that in the next few months as well. And then finally, into segue, we're going to have regional boards coming over the next few months to talk specifically about what they're doing. Patty's here today to talk about what Region 6 has done. We'll have Region 4 in soon. They're going to be adopting their climate resolution, should be next month. Region 9 as well. So you'll get to hear from the regions as well. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Patty.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and board members. I think we're still morning. I'm Patty Kuyumjan. Thank you for having me today to share some of the things that we're doing in our region. I'm pleased to do that. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Mayor Fiore Wagner in the audience. She did a lot of the hard work on this PowerPoint, and she's our environmental specialist that this is part of her new responsibilities to help lead our region. So. In my discussion today, I'd like to cover these areas, our regions, our process, how we got there, and more importantly, what did we learn along the way. But before I do that, let me just set the tone of why we did this. Why did our region start this 5 years ago? Well, we were watching our fellow agencies at the Energy Commission and the Air Board implement AB 32 and the other laws that went with it. And we were starting to see, I like to call them flashier flash floods in the southern part of our region, where we're seeing infrastructure getting damaged. We were seeing our fire change. We had a fire in February in Squaw Meadows that went up to the snow line. We had not seen those that much before. So our world was changing. And for our board, it was important to say, we want to do something about it. At the time, it seemed rather daunting and huge in terms of what to do. And so we embarked on a journey that I will say we kind of ebbed and flowed as we went, as you will see, sort of adaptively managed ourselves as we had perceived notions of, well, maybe this is what we should do, and well, maybe not. Maybe by talking to stakeholders, we should do something a little differently. So you'll see that peppered throughout our journey, that we ebbed and flowed and changed. But I think there was a value to that journey changing. I think we learned along the way, as did our stakeholders, and it built stronger relationships that hopefully you'll see through this presentation are critical to our success. Our board also knew that this should be our highest priority. They knew that whatever we did with climate change would have cross impacts on all of our programs, our permits, our inspections, our activities, our discussions with stakeholders. So this was probably one of our highest priorities that the board asked us to work on, which meant we had to shift from other programs to devote staff and time to this. But it's important to do so, because at the end, the results that will be yielded be very valuable. So I just wanted to set the stage on why we did this. I don't want to dwell on the uniqueness of our region, but it is unique. And we didn't realize how complicated dealing with climate change would be until we really got into it. You know, our local governments are different. The effects of climate change in the different parts of our region are very different, from the desert to the high mountains to up near Susanville, and now with the new cannabis program, I guess all the way down to the border. So this theme will come throughout this presentation because it really was changing how we think about things. Here are the several boxes, and I'm going to delve in each one of these boxes that we, as I would like to refer to our climate change journey, went through to get where we are. We started with the science. So what is the science telling us about our region? We then had board workshops and took stock of our laws. We had internal working groups of staff. We had a survey. We then did outreach meetings to test and try things. And our next steps will be our technical working groups and then a strategy to the board. And what we're trying to achieve with the strategy, which you'll hear about more at the end, is some meaty things that we could do. What are some meaty things that we at the Lahontan Region Board can do for climate change? You know, because we can't do everything, but what can we do? Stakeholder involvement was a really important cornerstone of this entire effort. You know, we had a lot of participation at our science and our workshops and our brainstorming sessions. We have a number of people on our lyrics list and growing, people who participated in the surveys, and sit-down outreach meetings where we had from citizens to county supervisors participate and roll up their sleeves and help. And again, you'll see later how important this is. This is a preconceived moment, you know, an aha moment that we had. You'll see a couple of them in the slides where you see a little light bulb there, but one of our aha moments was, wow, we can't do this all by ourselves. We really need to depend on the partnerships of others and the help of others. And maybe other people could do things better than us, and we should be a supporting role. A little bit different than our traditional regulatory role, but I think it's important. Oop, I went too far. Just 1 second. Too far. All right. Sorry about that. As I mentioned, we started with the science. We wanted to get a better understanding of the science that was out there at the time. And as we all know, science is changing. So even when we had these workshops, we've learned so much more since then. You know, what we learned is temperatures changes. Warmer surface waters, increasing dry spells. This is no surprise. You know, our northern region, we have to depend on more rain, less snow, earlier runoff, less storage. In our southern region that was hot already and dry in the desert was going to get hotter and drier and rather quickly. So this was real important. We had some wonderful scientists who came. We had a lot of participation from the public to hear the science. And by the way, we have a rather robust website where all of this information, as we gathered information, science, it's all up there to inform us. At these science sessions, we had kind of our initial brainstorming with the community and with our board members. You know, it became clear that we need to protect our resources and provide resiliency, improve our water supply and our water quality. We need to talk to the public more. We need to better understand that. And we really need to collaborate with partners. This is when I think this idea really came to a head for our board was, wow, you know, there are a lot of folks out there doing good work, and we need to see ourselves in a non-traditional role of partnering with them rather than just regulating folks. That's a path we should consider. And the aha moment, the little light bulb there is, you know, some adaptation actions may require us to re-examine or change our thinking, like in gray water. We may have to change our prohibitions, look at things differently than we have before. Our resource needs. We need dedicated people to provide effective level of outreach and education to the stakeholders, our dischargers, tribes. So we need to start building capacity in our own employees and staff, training, support. so that we could be there when folks come to us to ask for help. We need to be ready to provide that help. So that was really important. As well as, I will tell you, a shock value for all those of us staff going, wow, this is a pretty big issue. This is not going to be simple. That's, I think we had our first aha, this is not going to be simple moment.
Maybe those need to be stickers.
We then had workshops with our board and again the public where we shared again what we learned with the science, what we have gathered from talking to people. And it became clear to us, well, we need to develop some sort of a strategy. We need to also take stock of our existing authority and permits. Know what tools you have in the toolbox already before you embark on wanting to think about what is new or different that you should be doing. You really need to have a good understanding of that. Maybe re-examine your existing tools. Maybe they need to be tweaked. And then we need some factors, or when you come up with a whole range of ideas and you want to rack and stack them, you're going to have some sort of priority or factors to how to sort them. How do you sort those? And don't work in a silo is really important. Work with your other agencies, sister agency, with the state board, with everyone. You can't do this alone. You really need help. So here are some things that just came out of that initial meeting. And again, this journey, we change our thoughts, as you will see later in the presentation. But some of the ideas that came out of that was, well, that Tahoe Truckee floodplain prohibition works pretty well. Maybe there's some value in seeing if that would be used somewhere else in our region. We should maybe explore that further. Our Tahoe stormwater infiltration concepts work really well. Maybe, and those BMPs, maybe that's something we can use somewhere else. Maybe re-examine the anti-degradation requirements because you may have to do a trade-off for groundwater recharge that you may have a little less water quality, but is the benefit better for the water supply? And these are all ideas we need to examine. Our ambient monitoring needs to change. The way we do things, we need to maybe change the way we look at how we do our monitoring. As we have seen with the Sino-Hab outbreaks, and bioassessments and technology potentially will help us in this area. And we need to partner with the State Board more about funding to look at adaptation strategies. Now, this was in 2015, so much has changed since then with the SRF too. But these are some of the initial ideas we opined on back in 2015. I don't mean this to make you blind to look at this, but this really is a sort of a snapshot in time. It's already outdated, but it really, what I meant to say is we did this just to get a sense of, so what's out there today? Before we start on our effort, we need to really get a sense of what do we have. And we kind of realized we actually had a lot there than we realized we had. Again, even though this is outdated now, it was an important exercise to kind of wrap our heads around what is yet to be done. And I want to give a sense as we move through our own climate change strategy that we still have to adopt in our region, work did not stop. We started embedding into our staff thinking and building capacity and how we think about climate change. We renewed our timber waiver, and we already started embedding things into that for climate change. I mentioned that Squaw Meadow fire. That surely was an awakening for us, and it came at a time when we had to renew our emergency disaster waiver, which had always been written for wildfires. And we thought, wow, with climate change, we better write it for floods, for many things, debris management, anything that could come out of extreme weather events. This is our opportunity now in 2015 to change that. So we did. And we already picked some landfills that we knew could take a debris. And boy, am I glad we did that waiver refresh in 2015. It's come in handy quite a few times with flash floods and other things that we've had in our region. So the reason I bring this up is that even though we don't have our strategy, we started doing things in our region and embedding in permits Even when we go out and talk to people on inspections, the staff just ask them, when they inspect the sewage treatment, so what are you doing? What are some of your challenges? Do you need help with funding? We are now building it into our culture. Here are some other things that we're doing that are underway that we're trying to mesh climate change into now. We, of course, have a picture of our basin plan there. We're redoing a confined animal permit, and we're starting to look, and a lot of those are located in the desert where they have a lot of flash floods near the Mojave River. So we're starting incorporating that even in the draft that is yet to be out in the street later this year. We're working with LADWP on a general permit for all of their maintenance activities, which used to be permit by permit, issue by issue, and that was not feasible. But we've been working with them on the Owens River and the Owens Lake problem with the flooding from the snow melt from this past winter. And we're embedding what we're learning from that into this general permit, which is now out for CEQA comment. Our federal lands permit that we're working in tandem with Region 5, this would be with our federal partners for all non-point source pollution. I could tell you climate change is certainly in both the minds of our region and Region 5 as we start to craft this regulatory tool. Monitoring, obviously, harmful algal blooms. We're going to be hosting 2 workshops, north and south, this summer to educate the community, the locals, whomever, to help us monitor, because our region is rather remote. Getting from point A to point B is not that easy on these Sino-Hab outbreaks. So having a well-trained partners is real critical to that effort. You heard me mention bioassessments. We're embedding that into our swamp program, changing how we look at monitoring. Our Lake Tahoe nearshore studies that look both at public health and macrophyton and some hot spots. We hope to learn from that and transport that knowledge to our other 700 lakes that we have. Groundwater protection, we're finding a wealth of wonderful information in our salt nutrient management plans that are going to guide us on many other decisions that we make. We're kind of, if you will, mining existing work and also asking questions of those yet to develop them to factoring in climate change. And we're exploring Mojave water quality objectives to set. We have a lot of pristine and good quality groundwater aquifers in our region, which I know some of my fellow regions can't quite say, but I'm grateful we have that. So how do we maintain that? So we're going to be borrowing from our partners at Region 8 and how they deal with their objectives to see if we could learn from them on protecting some of these groundwater aquifers. And our region in certain areas is getting a lot of population growth. So we're at an optimum time now to think about, to get ahead of the curve, if you will. Well, nothing happens overnight and nothing happens easy. These are our internal working groups. This is our staff. Now that we have wonderful ideas and you'll see, we actually need staff to help us work on this. And we kind of broke it down into 3 working groups of internal staff. And one thing that I will say about this is our staff have been really wonderful in this. I mean, I can only do this because we have talented and hardworking staff. And we meshed people from north and south who don't normally work with each other. We have folks from different programs that didn't normally work in areas, and we kind of mixed them all up. And some really good creative ideas came out of that. And I can't stress enough the importance of talented staff and their hard work, because none of this will get done without the benefit of them. And so I'm very grateful for that. Here are some of the things that our internal working group, our staff internally are doing to kind of the underpinnings of this whole effort of getting to a strategy. They worked on the survey, which you'll hear about more. They maintain our robust website, which I encourage you to take a peek at if you in your copious free time. Identify other groups, other efforts, and stakeholders. We have a lot of really, one of the other ahas I have, humbled by how many of our stakeholders were willing to give of their time, of their expertise, and roll up their sleeve and say, hey, I'm willing to sit down with you and your staff and really kind of dig into these issues and help you develop these. I wasn't expecting that. It was actually a very nice surprise that I had so many people dedicated to give of their time and their expertise. This group also is establishing the criteria that I mentioned earlier to prioritize the actions. You know, our board and our staff are realistic. At the end of the day, we may come up with a strategy with 15 ideas, but maybe we can only do 5 of them. We don't have dedicated resources. We don't have dedicated funding. We're borrowing from Peter to pay for Paul, you know, which is at the cost of other programs. But it's important. We need to do it. But I have to be realistic. We may not be able to do all of it. So their role and how they're going to prioritize and criteria is what will guide our board at the end of this year on picking the strategy and which of the 15 or whatever we choose we can reasonably do. And disseminate funding opportunities. We work with the DFA and get all of their kernels of ideas of new money, and we share that with all of our stakeholders who are very thrilled to get, you know, information about new opportunities for funding. We actually did a survey, which is something we don't normally do. So it was kind of new and different for those of us in staff who don't normally do surveys. But it was an interesting experience. We had about 175 people complete the survey, and as you can see, we had a pretty good spectrum of people that participated. As you can see for the first pie chart, you know, it was sort of across our region, you know, more I think in the south you'll see in terms of volume of people. Just because we didn't get the volume, didn't we get the robustness of the ideas from those. But you know, we talked about water conservation, outreach, monitoring, low-impact development was quite popular, aquatic protection, infrastructure risk. These were all things we asked in the survey, and what we did is we kind of got some ideas, and we threw them out there in the surveys to say, would you strongly support or not support? Because we wanted to kind of gauge, our board wanted to kind of gauge some of these ideas that we had heard from the workshops and from these brainstorming sessions, because even though it's a good idea, if your stakeholders don't support it, you know, you kind of want to get, so this was like a litmus test or a temperature, I would say. And we also encourage people to come up with their own ideas. And you could see, again, the second pie chart, the cross-section of like who were these folks. And you could see, I was surprised to see how kind of balanced that was, that we had a little bit from everyone, the federal government, counties, locals, NGOs, a lot of citizens participated as well. I want to let you know we printed the survey or made it available in Spanish and English to get interest. And we got a lot of interesting input from people, a lot of ideas. We asked them about short-term and long-term things to consider as part of the ranking. And some of the challenges that kind of rose to the top, we asked them, like, one of the questions was, so what are some challenges that you foresee? And was the cost and economics, the cost of dealing with climate change. Water rights came up, interestingly enough, in many times. And some of the existing regulations they felt were a damper for them to trying to deal with climate change. So those are some of the themes that came up in it. And the aha moment, my little light bulb in there was, I had a lot of people write, hey, I really want to help you on this. I really want to give my time. And so we got a lot of good names and contacts out of the survey. Here are some other things that we learned from our survey. There was a clamoring from the respondents to have more financial support to affect change. That a lot of them felt like money was a barrier for them to be able to do things to deal with climate change. That there were a lot of efforts underway that the Water Board, this means with local governments and NGOs and others, that they had that we could partner and leverage. So we learned that, wow, there's a lot more out there than we knew was out there before. And let's work with that on some of those. For example, There's an arc storm project in Tahoe where they look at the extreme weather events. There's Tahoe West, which is a collaborative federal, state, locals to deal with fuels reduction. There's Sierra Camp program, deal again fuels. There's lots of really good efforts. Sierra Meadows partnership. We really learned that there was a lot of good effort out there that we could partner with and build upon. And we learned, again, we were taking the litmus test. We had a bunch of ideas we threw out there, like, would you like to see requirements on LID, or would you like to see collaboration on LID, for example, low impact development? And, it gauged what people said. And just to report, people would prefer the collaborative effort on LID and not a regulatory tool as a way of dealing with. That's what our survey, we heard back from our constituents. We had broad goals of protecting wetlands and infrastructure. They were highly supported, but the strategies and how to get there, like increased mitigation ratios, prohibitions, additional requirements, were less supported. Throughout the survey, it was clear that the collaborative soft path with people was more popular than the hammer. I guess that's not surprising, but it's good to, to hear that from folks. And tools being used by others to build their adaptation plans can be used to maximize our efficiency. For example, Lancaster has a rather robust low impact development program that some of the other desert cities don't have. And by partnering with them, we could share with Apple Valley, Victorville, Hesperia, what they have learned. And that is a more effective tool than the Lahontan regulatory folks coming in, So that's an example of what I mean by the tools being used by others. Now that we had our science, our survey, the good information from workshops, wow, now we really got to distill it down, don't we? We got to start getting down to, so what are we going to do? So we kind of focused on 6 overarching goals, which I'm distilling down to those 3 right there. And we prepared a staff report in 2017 where we spent some time talking about our sister agencies at the Air Board, because one of the things that we heard in our journey was, well, how does the Lahontan piece fit in the overall piece of AB 32? I mean, how does those pieces and parts fit together? So we did a staff report that kind of explained what was going on statewide and how our piece of the puzzle fits slots in there. I think our stakeholders needed that, our board needed that, our staff needed that to kind of see how it fits together. We prepared little white papers, if you will, or issue papers on the 6 goals where we, again, if you remember that confusing slide called the conceptual site model about existing, we updated it and refreshed it. So in our documents we prepared, so what is the state board doing? What are some things the state board's working on? Water board, what are some things the regional board has either done or is in the queue? What are some of the things we put, also what of our stakeholders and our partners are doing? The Sierra Meadows project, we kind of explained a little bit that. We gave web links. We provided some background. We threw in some ideas for, again, similar to the survey. Well, what if we were to place requirements on low impact development permits? What if we, we're going to expand the prohibitions in Truckee and Tahoe to other parts of it. What would you think about that? And so we did that because we wanted to, I will prime the pump. Sometimes when you throw out ideas, whether people like them or love them, you kind of get people thinking. And so we really wanted to make sure that people came to these workshops kind of thinking, and also what's not there. Just because we threw some ideas on these issue paper doesn't mean those are the right ideas. So again, this was a way to prime the pump. And so we had 3, one in Truckee, one in Apple Valley, and one in Bishop. And we found some kind of commonalities of supporting goals out of that, sitting down. And like I said, these are the meetings where I had from citizens to county supervisors attend. We really had a good cross-section again, as you saw in the survey, of federal, state, local, NGOs. It was a nice mix of folks at those. But here are some general goals that we kind of came out of all three that we saw, that there was a commonality that infrastructure protection was important, no matter in all three of those. In our central and northern areas, protection and restoration of headwaters rose to the top in terms of what was important to them. Not so much in our southern meetings, though. Headwaters was not on their mind, even though some of their water comes from the headwaters. Stormwater treatment infiltration was at the top of their list in terms of what they thought was important that we should focus on. So here are some key messages that we came out of those workshops. That adapted to climate change really is the great unifier for all of us, local governments, NGOs, and it brought people would normally work together because you have to. And so that, we're sort of a bonding on all of that I think we built some partnerships with folks that I think is long lasting in our region. That's really important. And you have to balance and harmonize different interests. That came out clear from our stakeholders in meetings that it can't be a one size fits all or one solution for one community. You have to have some flexibility here. And we have to account for resource limitations, both those of the local governments, of the NGOs, and ourselves at the regional board of what we can reasonably do with the staff that we have and the time that we have available. And maybe we should concentrate on select actions and support outside efforts. You heard me say that before. If there are existing efforts underway by others, then support those and knit those into what you're doing in your region. And realize approaches for stormwater treatment and infiltration need to be tailored for local and sub-regional conditions. Snow versus desert, very different. And you have to account for those regional differences as you move forward on the path. And you need to optimize on efforts of products generated by others to help our strategies. I think I mentioned a few of those before. The SIGMA agencies, there's a wealth of information there, for example, where they can identify groundwater recharge areas as part of their charge. Well, that's beneficial to me as a water quality agency in terms of knowing where those are. So when we cite landfills or other things, there's the cross-pollination of information is important. And embed technical support and funding into proposed activities. We need to, embed how we do outreach, as I said, with our folks, but also just technical support. I'm seeing a big draw on my staff for technical support, for applications, for funding, for building things. So, that's something that I sort of expected, but not as much. It's a good thing. It's a pull on an organization, and you need to prepare for that. So out of the outreach meetings, here are some, again, the ideas in terms of actions, across the 3 stakeholder meetings that kind of bubbled up to the top. Not saying these are all of them, but these are just some of the themes that came out of actions. So it's promote protection and management of natural and working lands to optimize benefits and landscape resiliency. Establish criteria to identify vulnerable areas and critical recharge zones. That's an important one. Modify land use policies to restrict development and types of land uses. This is in floodplains. So in Tahoe Truckee, we don't allow construction unless certain exemptions in floodplains. In the southern part of our region, there is a lot of building in floodplains. So how do you balance that? Streamlined permitting has come throughout the whole effort journey. From the beginning to the end, people ask, could you please streamline your regulatory efforts? So as we look at our new regulations, this is an opportunity to streamline them. Do you really need all that monitoring? Is there an easy way to do this? I'm converting in our region a lot of ours from prescriptive-based permitting to performance-based, allowing more flexibility in how the discharger can comply. And even just for my timber waiver, which used to be super prescriptive, now it's performance-based, I have 100% compliance. It's cheaper for the Forest Service and land managers, and so we're shifting to performance-based. Sorry, I went back to an example, but back to the slide, consider turbidity requirements. For example, there may be a trade-off where turbidity increases for a while you're doing wetlands restoration, and maybe we should allow for that, or how do we allow for that better going forward? Promote stormwater infiltration and LID practices through outreach first and permit second. We heard that strong and clear. Please don't force us to do low impact development, but help us build that capacity. Explore innovative approaches. Think outside of the box. Try something new. In the north, where we've got smaller communities, maybe regional municipal stormwater treatment facilities, because they can't afford it on their own, is something we should consider. We had water quality trading come up a couple of times in the south, which, by the way, I'm experimenting with PG&E and a farmland swap. We're doing a pilot. Interbasin sales and leases for water transfers. So there were like kind of out-of-the-box ideas that came out of these workshops that we should think about. And technology, I think, is another one. It's not on the slide, but technology is changing. We should embrace it. Perhaps there's some things there we could use. I think that you heard me mention the technical work. This is what I refer to when we get the staff and those lovely volunteers to roll up their sleeves and dig into some of all that we've learned in our journey, from the surveys to the science to the workshops to everything, to our stakeholder partners. You heard me say, I think our board is very interested. What is exactly we're going to do? What action, hard, black and white things are we going to do? So here are some, these aren't all the ideas, but these are just some to give you an idea that what we're going to be drilling down with our technical groups over this spring to discuss. On infrastructure, vulnerability and risk assessments, adaptation plans for infrastructure, where are our risks, what should we be looking at? Maybe expand prohibitions to protect sensitive environments, or to look at that. You see a couple of the names down below, the folks that are going to be helping us with those. For wetlands and floodplains, maybe streamline permitting for meadow restorations, develop criteria for grazing management on public and private lands. We're doing something with the Bridgeport ranchers to do a watershed-based approach to help both the Bridgeport Reservoir and the ranchers and utilize wetlands as a method of dealing with both helping with climate change, resiliency, water quality, and better compliance, and an easier way of doing that for the ranchers. Stormwater lid, revise permits to maximize treatment and filtration opportunities, lid outreach, incorporate lid practices into permits potentially. So these are just a sampling of some of the hard and fast things that we're going to be digging into over the next couple months. The strategy, that's the big kahuna, if you will, that's going to be going to our board in the fall. We hope to have it out for public comment in the late summer. But these are some key elements that will be in it. The current and anticipated impacts to water quality and water resources is what we're going to knit in all the science that we have learned. Some of our goals, you've seen these goals in my presentation, the infrastructure, the floodplains, the stormwater, and the partnerships. That came real clear. We need to have partnerships as part of our solution. Actions. So what's within our sphere of influence, and what about our partners? What is it that they can do? Can't we knit this all together in this document? And then prioritization. Threat to water quality, costs, political controversy. That's going to be the hard part, right? If, like you heard me say, if I have 15 ideas, which of the 15 can we do? We're going to have to think about that. And then the schedule, because none of us wants us to be a report collecting dust on the shelf. We want to go into actions. So when are we going to do these things? How are we going to refine our priorities? When are we going to get these things done? So that's going to be a real key part of the strategy is the meat and potatoes of it. Get it done. Some key considerations. Yeah, this is a heavy lift. it's a moving schedule. It's not easy. We have limited resources, and we have to be nimble and evolving because it's going to change. We need to expand localized concept region-wide. If it's working in a particular community, like in Tahoe, then you heard me say about nearshore, you heard me talk about some of the BMPs in Lake Tahoe, maybe we can expand that to our region and share that with other communities. Engage stakeholders and regulate communities so actions align. We really need them, have them at the table with us along the entire implementation of the strategy. Partner with efforts underway or planned when we have less authority in where we have less authority in jurisdiction. You know, the Sierra Meadows project is a good example. They're better suited to do that. We should partner with them, support them. Encourage public input and provide transparency. That's something that we've been doing throughout and we hope to do as we implement this strategy. And shift annual priorities and work plans as we adapt concepts. We're going to have to constantly be doing that in our region. Stop what you're doing on this, guess what, you're working on this next. Realize climate change adaptation may require some departure from traditional ways of thinking and conventional solutions. We're all learning that as staff as we go out and meet. To me, with as an executive officer, I get the joy from knowing that, you know, my staff now, when they go in inspection, have a climate change discussion with the folks when they're out in the field. What do you see and what's happened in the past? What are you going to be doing? What are your challenges? For climate change to be successful, it's got to be built into the day-to-day work that you do. It's just got to become your new normal of thinking, of talking, of communicating for it to be truly effective, at least in my opinion. And I'm seeing that from my staff, embracing that, so it's good to see. And also work with the State Bar to identify policy and regulations and funding to facilitate adaptation. There are some things I think a region is suited to do, and I think some things where the State Board is better suited to do things potentially on infrastructure for across the state rather than just my little region. And I think I hope I've kind of just talked about this throughout the whole journey here. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, but take it slow. You know, and as you saw, we learned a lot along, and I'm sure we have a lot more to learn as we develop our strategy implement. I'm sure we're going to have twists and turns on that. Anyways, that's my presentation. Let me know if you have any questions.
Oh, thank you. Very thoughtful. Helpful. Thoughts, questions?
So I did have a question for you, Patty, and for you, Jelena, just kind of connecting the dots here on just pulling out one area that you both talked a bit about, and that is streamlined permitting. So take, say, the vulnerability analysis and some of the things that our staff is looking at in terms of streamlined analyses with coastal permits, et cetera. Do you see that that would also be useful with respect to some of the federal agencies that you're involved with? Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service?
I would say yes. Our federal partners, particularly as we're learning with our federal non-point source permit, have limited resources. And so you have to work with them in a collaborative way to maybe focus on priority areas or priority projects to work on, because it's probably not reasonable to expect BLM or the Forest Service to adapt to climate change in all the areas at once or fix all their roads at once, but maybe getting together, we could focus on 5 or 6 watersheds we all agree that are potentially impaired, more vulnerable, more risked, that we could focus our efforts on and then move to the next 5. That's kind of the theme that we're trying to get out with that federal joint permit, but I think it tailors with climate change too, because you can't do everything at once. Did that answer your question?
Yes. And then, Jelena, federal agencies?
I wanted to for sure mention Region 5, the Central Valley Water Board has actually had a bunch of stakeholder meetings while they were developing their climate change work plan, which was adopted last December by the regional board. And one of the things that they also looked into was this streamlining of permitting, because sometimes vulnerability assessment was done by a local government for some other local purpose. And so there was discussion going on whether in this streamlining, meeting requirement for another agency, whether federal or local, could be somehow, part of the water board's permitting. And so I guess the answer is that it depends. Depends what the requirements were and where it was and how it was done. But I wanted to make sure to mention that people are thinking about integrating vertically and kind of like outside of silos, because if it's in one place, layers of regulation and agencies that are playing need to be unpacked, and then we can figure out how to do it. And I think what really resonated with me from Patty's presentation and the approach from Lahontan Regional Board was understanding the tools that you already have. And sometimes these vulnerability assessments might be the tools that are already out there, and maybe just we need to have a conversation with other agencies to make sure if tweaking one requirement would then make that assessment broadly applicable, that would make sense. So there's conversation about that, and I know that our MPDS managers that are within the state water board and working with the regional boards are having a conversation about permitting, and I think they will be bringing you more information about that later in the year.
The only word of caution, Board Member Diadamo, I think on this topic with respect to federal agencies is because those agencies now may not have a strong climate change purview, that we as the state have to be, mindful and careful about making sure that our state policies are there no matter what the federal agencies are doing.
Absolutely. That was part of the reason I asked. Thanks.
If you don't mind, I want to add a little, because I realized I didn't quite answer your permit streamlining question, but in my region, what I hear the most, what I've seen the most benefit from is what I would call performance-based requirements that we're shifting to, because it allows the discharge to have flexibility to comply with it. And I'll give you an example in a second. And monitoring. Probably the two that I hear the most in my region. And on the monitoring, it's like, do you really need 10 analytes quarterly? Or can you do that for a year and then back off to 7 analytes and do it twice a year? And so every time a permit comes in, every time any requirement, we build that into our permitting as a revisit of the monitoring, so that we don't, as we get busy, have the person send for years non-detects in. So that's one thing that we're building into that in climate change. On performance-based permitting, we find that really is a more flexible way and helps the dischargers, helps us, and gets increased compliance. I'll give you an example. In the timber waiver, for years, people would do fuels reduction, create big piles, let them cure for 2 years, and then set them on fire. If you build them too high and too big, you sterilize the soil below. Now you have dead earth, you have runoff come across it, you've got a sediment problem into your streams. Our permits used to say it could only be so high by this wide, this diameter trees, and it was too hard for the forest folks to comply with that. Get out there with their measuring tapes, and it just wasn't practical. So a performance-based requirement is, within 1 year, you can manage whatever size, whatever pile, however you want, but in 1 year, I need to see vegetation back in that burn scar. Then you leave flexibility for them on how they want to do that. It saves them money and time and effort and gives us what we need, which is we want the burn scar with vegetation back so we don't have a water quality problem. That's an example of performance-based that we're using.
Other questions? I know blood sugar is kicking in for some. Well, thank you very much. Did you say earlier that we're going to have reports from each of the regions, or are we getting this report from Lahontan because they're ahead?
We're getting this report from Lahontan because of all the work they've done.
Yeah, that's great.
But some of the other regions are taking actions this year and will want to come. I don't know that we'll have all 9, but we'll have certainly a few more over the course of the rest of the year.
Great. That's great. Well, thank you. A lot to think about. I have some thoughts on things to ask about, but I'm not going to keep you here. I'll just send you a list to think about afterwards. Really important work, and really thank you very, very much, all of you, for all of this work, and you too, for all of it, as well as the scores of people who undoubtedly have participated in this at both the state level and in Lahontan. It's great. Thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate the coordination with the other regional boards too that you mentioned during the talk. That it's not just the stakeholders that you're learning from, but also are within the water board family. So thanks.
Thanks a lot. Good to see you. Let's do some very quick board member reports before we adjourn into executive, or whatever it's called, closed session, to talk about the Stornetta matter quickly, because I know there's places people need to be today. I'll start on this side today. Anything? Yeah, please. Nothing. That's the ultimate quick. Yeah, good. Not good, but fine.
All right, I'll do this in 2 sentences. Friday, March 23rd, keynote at American Society of Civil Engineers.
Oh, cool.
Annual symposium in California. And then on Tuesday, March 27th, participated in a panel, kind of like a keynote panel with elected officials from water districts on the water reuse conference, where we had a town hall meeting and talked a lot about infrastructure around water recycling and the innovation going on right now. We heard about Padre Dam, also Los Virginis, and the Pure Water Monterey project, which was, there was a celebration about that, as well as Santa Clara Valley Water District and their groundwater recharge projects. A lot happening with water reuse, and they were very grateful about our staff's efforts to get the reservoir augmentation regulations done last month. Yes. Thank you.
So on the 21st, I was at the Groundwater Resources Association's Groundwater Symposium. We had some staff. Eric Ekdahl also spoke, and in my remarks made just the main point that Sigma rather, and the development of these GSBs are the first time that we're going to be connecting surface water and groundwater, insofar as the requirements for these groundwater sustainability plans to show that they aren't having unreasonable impacts on surface water flows. So really, one sentence, but actually pretty important part of the work that's going to get done. And then on the 26th, I spoke at the Water Reuse Conference as well. I was a day before Board Member Moore, and took the opportunity while I was out there to meet with our district engineer at the Division of Drinking Water there, Jan Swagert, which was a great conversation to sit down with her. And then this past Friday was at the board's data fair, which
Excellent.
Our executive director, Eileen Sobek, spoke very well about the efforts, actually, and was a great gathering of interested parties around the data resources we currently have and some of the systems, and some really good discussion about where things are going from here. So,
fantastic, and thanks to you and Vice Chair Moore for covering so many of the things that the other 3 of us cannot during this era. I just want to mention a couple of things. One is on Friday, since we did have a break for the holiday for some, I went to this San Mateo County gathering on a water summit. It was great. I got to see all of the storyboards from the water reuse conference. They were displayed there with Steve. I saw Steve and Randy's name on the things, and I'll send better quality photos of that than I did the other day. But it was great and just inspiring to see the work folks are doing at a local level on the ground. It was like we talk about all of whether it's conservation or recycling or stormwater capture, and it was just so fun to bask in the presence of the local energy of folks who are actually trying to make it happen in a real place. So that was therapeutic for me and quite terrific. And Grant Davis was the keynote speaker, and he was awesome. So it was really, really, really good. And the other thing I'll just make a note of that we'll probably talk about the next time is that the next 2 days we have two very important meetings. Tomorrow and the next day is the every 5-year Tribal Water Summit. It's at McClellan, so that I'll be there the whole time. We have a good delegation of staff going this time. It was disappointing to me last time, so I'm very happy to see that we have so many people going that we were asked to pare it back, and we said no. So I think that's good because it's so important to have the relationship and to really be able to listen to tribes. A big focus on water rights in terms of tribal notions of water rights, federally reserved rights, but also being able to have a conversation on it. We talked about it at the last summit, but was more of an opening salvo, but I think it'll be an important couple of days if anyone wants to stop by. Someone like Gita can just make sure there aren't 3 of us. I'll be there the whole time, so one at a time could go. I'm assuming you're coming.
I was planning on going tomorrow.
Are you planning on going? Okay, great, tomorrow. So how about Thursday?
Not Thursday, that's the Water Affordability Symposium. We'll be
Perfect,
having
and
here.
you're going to be speaking at that.
I'll be there so.
Perfect.
Yep.
So if anybody else wants to stop by on Thursday, we can get you the information. And then, of course, Thursday is that Water Affordability Summit, which I wish I could go to, but I have to stay present and visible at the entire tribal summit. So I should have said something while Max was still here. I just really appreciate that. I'll look forward to hearing about it. And with that, we will recess into a closed session. I'll allow Michael to say whatever legally he has to say.
Correct.
Or
The only item I
illegally,
wanted
don't
to notice, there are 2 items noticed for closed session, but the board will only be meeting on the second item, which is to deliberate on the proposed order addressing a draft cease and desist order and administrative civil liability complaint concerning the Stornetta Family Trust. And it will not be meeting in closed session on water fix.
Great. And if you don't mind, we will adjourn there immediately, because I know there's some of us have a need to get somewhere at 1, if we can.